Hey guys, imagine this. One man, born in the dusty steppes, rises to conquer a chunk of the world, bigger than any empire before or since, leaving behind a genetic legacy in one out of every 200 men alive today. Not from charming dates, but from his Ibu, system of conquest that turned bedrooms into battlefields and love into loot. We're talking Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire, where happily ever after often meant happily enslaved forever. Buckle up, because what you're about to hear isn't just history. It's a nightmare wrapped in horsehide, with a side of sarcasm to make the horror go down easier. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights and maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Oh, the Mongol Empire, that sprawling beast of an empire that stretched from the Pacific waves crashing on China's shores to the icy rivers of Eastern Europe, gobbling up lands like a starving nomad at a feast. But let's not romanticize it too much. This wasn't some enlightened utopia on horseback. No, this was a time when survival meant dodging arrows, famine, and the whims of warlords who treated human lives like disposable tent pegs. And when it came to the horrifying sexual practices, well, buckle your historical seatbelts, folks, because we're about to unpack a Pandora's box of absurdity, pain, and the kind of irony that makes you wonder if humanity ever really evolves or just swaps swords for smartphones. Picture the steppes, vast wind-swept plains where the sky meets the earth in an endless embrace, and life is a brutal ballet of herding sheep, riding horses, and occasionally raiding your neighbors for fun and profit. In this world, sex wasn't just about passion or procreation. It was politics, power, and payback. Enter Temujin, better known as Genghis Khan, the ultimate underdog story gone horribly, hilariously wrong. Born around 1162, this kid had a childhood that would make modern therapists weep. His dad, a minor chieftain named Yesuge, gets poisoned by rivals, classic steppe drama, and suddenly young Temujin is abandoned with his mom, Hawalun, and siblings, left to scrape by on wild onions and the occasional marmot. Survival? It's not just about food, it's about dodging the constant threat of being enslaved or worse. Hawalun, bless her tough-as-leather soul, teaches her kids to stick together, using that famous parable of the arrows. One snaps easy, but a bundle? Unbreakable. Ironic, isn't it? Because later, Genghis' own family would splinter like cheap firewood. But hey, hindsight's a luxury the past couldn't afford. Now, let's talk romance, Mongol style. Marriage wasn't a Hallmark card affair. It was a strategic alliance sealed with livestock and the occasional kidnapping. Exogamy was the rule. Marry outside your clan to build bridges or burn them if things went south. Men paid a bride price, often in horses or labor, but if you were broke, and most nomads were, why not just steal your bride? Abduction was practically a national sport, a way to weaken rivals and score a spouse in one fell swoop. Imagine, you're a young warrior, spot a girl from the enemy tribe, and instead of swiping right, you swipe her, literally tossing her over your saddle and galloping off into the sunset. Romantic? Only if your idea of courtship involves screams and arrows whizzing past your head. And get this wasn't rare, it was custom. Genghis himself started his empire building with a rescue mission after his own wife, Bort, was abducted by the Merkids. Yes, the great Khan's origin story includes his bride being kidnapped and possibly raped. Rumors swirled about whether his eldest son Jochi was really his or a Merkid souvenir. Genghis, in a rare moment of what passes for mercy in those days, accepted the kid anyway. But oh, the family reunions must have been awkward. Pass the kumis, son, whoever's you are. Borte's abduction highlights the raw pain of survival in this era. Women like her weren't just prizes. They were pawns in a game where losing meant everything from forced marriage to outright slavery. And Bort? She wasn't some damsel. She helped Genghis plot his revenge, whispering strategies while nursing that may be his kid. Their marriage became the foundation of an empire, but let's not sugarcoat it. It started with violence. Genghis rallied allies, including his blood brother Jamuka, more on that bromance later, and raided the Merkids, slaughtering men and claiming women as spoils. It's estimated that in these early tribal wars, captive women were distributed like loot. Some became wives, others concubines, and the unlucky ones? Well, use your imagination, but history whispers horrors. One chronicler notes how women were dragged from husbands' arms, sisters from brothers, all in the name of conquest. Absurd, right? In a world where unity was preached via arrow bundles, division was sown through bedsheets. As Genghis rose, unifying the tribes under his banner by 1206, his sexual politics scaled up. Polygamy was the norm for the elite. Why have one wife when you can have a herd? Genghis amassed wives and concubines like he collected territories, each one a symbol of power. His senior wife Borte ruled the roost, but behind her yurt came junior wives, then concubines in a pecking order that would make modern reality TV blush. Concubines, often captives from defeated tribes, forced into service where service meant everything from bearing heirs to warming the Khan's bed on cold steppe nights. And heirs? Genghis was prolific. DNA studies suggest 16 million descendants today, a genetic footprint that's equal parts impressive and terrifying. Ironic twist, in a culture where women could own property and divorce, more rights than many medieval ladies elsewhere. They were still commodities in war. Own land? Sure, but get conquered and your property yourself. Let's zoom in on the absurdity of it all. Mongol society prized toughness. Men and women rode, shot bows, and endured blizzards that would freeze your sarcasm solid. Women managed camps, churned kumis, fermented mare's milk, the original energy drink, and even shamanized, reading omens and sheep bones. Shamans could be female, idukun, drumming up spirits and weather alike. Yet, in conquest, that equality evaporated. When cities fell, and boy did they fall, women bore the brunt. Take the early campaigns against the Xia or Jin dynasty. Resistance meant massacre and survivors. Women and children herded like cattle. Some sources whisper of systematic rape, not as random chaos but calculated terror. Jack Weatherford, that optimistic historian, claims no documented cases, arguing steppe culture frowned on it. Discipline was key, rape a sign of weakness. But others? Persian chroniclers like Juvayni paint pictures of women separated from men, dragged away amid wails. How many Peri-like ones did they drag from the bosoms of their husbands? He laments Peri being fairy beauties. Poetic, but the pain's real. Families torn, bodies claimed. And oh, the historical absurdity peaks with Genghis's own words, or at least what's attributed to him by Rashid al-Din. A man's greatest pleasure is to defeat his enemies, to exterminate them and seize everything they have. To watch their wives weep, weep, to ride their smooth steeds, to treat their lovely queens and concubines as pajamas and pillows, to gaze on and kiss their rose-tinted faces, to suck their sweet lips berry-tinted like their nipples. Yikes. Is this real or Persian flair? Either way, it captures the mindset. Conquest wasn't just land, it was total domination, body and soul. Imagine surviving that, the sheer pain of watching your world burn, then being gifted to a victor as a pillow. Survival in the past? It's not heroic, it's horrific, a daily grind of adapting or dying. But wait, there's more irony. Mongol women weren't passive. Take Holon again. Abandoned, she foraged, hunted, and raised a conqueror. Or Sorgagtani Beki, widow of Genghis' son Tolui, who maneuvered her sons to thrones, playing politics like a pro. She refused remarriage, claiming devotion to her kids, bucking custom for power. Women like her show the flip side, in peace, agency, in war, agony. Yet even they navigated a world where abduction loomed. Genghis' laws, the Yasa, tried to curb some chaos, no kidnapping within tribes post-unification, but old habits died hard. As the empire expanded, so did the horrors. Early conquests like the Merkid Revenge set the tone. Raid, kill, claim. Women from defeated clans were integrated, married off, their kids adopted into Mongol lines. Miscegenation? Encouraged blending blood to build loyalty. But the pain? Imagine being Bort, rescued but forever scarred, or a Merkid girl now wife to her captor. Survival meant assimilation, birthing the next generation of warriors who'd repeat the cycle. Absurd? Utterly. And sarcastic as it sounds, this was progress. Genghis banned some tribal feuds, but exported violence globally. What do you think, viewers? Could you hack it as a steppe survivor, dodging raids and romantic kidnappings? Drop a comment with your take. Did Genghis innovate empire building or just amplify ancient atrocities? And hey, if this hook has you horrified yet hooked, stick around for part 2, where we dive deeper into the harem horrors and wartime woes. Let's keep rolling with the rise. By 1209, Genghis turns on the Shisha, those Tangut folks who thought paying tribute meant safety. Nope. Resistance, cities razed, women enslaved. One tale claims a princess castrated him in bed, probably myth, but speaks to the desperation. Pain of survival? It's in every captive's eyes, forced to march with the horde, tending wounds of men who wrecked their homes. Ironic, Mongols tolerated religions, shamans, Buddhists, Christians mingled, but not rebellion. Submit and maybe thrive, resist and become a footnote in someone's harem. Concubines, the golden cage, as one source calls it. Elite captives lived in luxury, silks, jewels, but at what cost? Autonomy zero, mercy optional. Genghis's harem, hundreds per legends, each a trophy from afar. Yesui, a Nestorian Christian wife, brought alliances. Her faith spread, but was it choice? Doubtful. Yochi Khatun, wife to his son, managed estates, dipped in diplomacy, power but born from conquest. And the lower ranks? Sexual slavery pure and simple, comfort for soldiers, disposing bodies post-battle. Horrifying, understatement. In an empire praising unity, division was sexualized. Early empire absurdities abound. Ogode, Genghis's successor, once ordered 4,000 Oirat girls raped. Tyranny, not norm, but shows power's corruption. Tolui? Anal assault on prisoners as revenge. Rare, but real, highlighting how horrifying scaled with success. Survival's pain? It's Holan starving, Borte abducted, nameless women weeping. Yet they endured, birthing history's giants. Ironic legacy, an empire of tolerance built on intolerance's back. Hey, comment crew, what's the most absurd historical fact you've heard? Share below, and let's keep the conversation galloping. As we wrap part 1, remember, this is just the setup. Genghis's DNA empire, built on tears and tenacity. Stay tuned for part 2's deeper dives. Hey guys, welcome back to our wild ride through the Mongol Empire's horrifying sexual practices, where love was less about hearts and flowers and more about swords and subjugation. If you thought part 1 was a gut punch of historical horror, strap in. Things are about to get even weirder, darker, and dare I say, more absurdly ironic. We're diving into the empire at its peak, where conquest turned bedrooms into war zones and survival meant navigating a world where power was the ultimate aphrodisiac. Got your kumis ready? Let's gallop into part 2. Picture the Mongol Empire in its prime, around 1220 to 1250, a juggernaut stretching from Korea to the Caspian Sea, swallowing kingdoms like a ravenous wolf devouring a herd. Genghis Khan's vision of world domination is in full swing, and his sons and generals are carrying the torch, or rather, the flaming arrows, torching cities and rewriting the rules of human interaction. This wasn't just about land or gold, it was about people, specifically women, turned into tools of empire building. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they colonized bodies, weaving a tapestry of terror that makes modern soap operas look tame. And oh, the irony. An empire that prided itself on order and discipline ran on a chaotic undercurrent of sexual violence and calculated cruelty. Let's unpack this nightmare, shall we? First, let's talk harems, because nothing screams imperial excess like a tent city filled with captive women. Genghis, now the Great Khan, didn't just collect wives, he amassed a traveling entourage of concubines that could populate a small town. Chroniclers like Rashid al-Din toss around numbers like 500 to 1,000 women, though let's be real, medieval scribes loved a good exaggeration. Still, the logistics are staggering. These weren't just random flings, they were a status symbol, a living trophy case of conquests. Every time a city fell, be it Samarkand, Bukhara, or some unfortunate Jin outpost, the prettiest, noblest women were cherry-picked for the Khan's pleasure. Imagine being a princess one day, sipping tea in a palace, and the next you're a gift in a yurt, surrounded by strangers who don't speak your language. Survival meant adapting, learning to navigate a world where your value was tied to your looks or lineage, not your soul. Painful, beyond words. Ironic? Oh, absolutely. Because while Mongol women like Borte wielded influence at home, these foreign captives were stripped of everything but their utility. But it wasn't just Genghis. His sons, grandsons, and generals got in on the act, turning harems into a family business. Ogode, his successor, was notorious for his appetites. Booze, women, you name it. One story, possibly apocryphal but too juicy to ignore, claims he once demanded 4,000 girls from the Oirat tribe as a tribute. Whether it happened or not, it paints a picture. Women as currency, their bodies bartered to cement alliances or punish. Defiance. The secret history of the Mongols, that epic tell-all of the steppe, mentions how defeated tribes were forced to offer daughters to seal submission. Refuse? Your village becomes ash, and you're lucky if you're just enslaved. The absurdity is in the scale. Entire populations redistributed like livestock, with women bearing the brunt of this grim trade. And yet, survival demanded compliance. Learn the language, charm the warlord, maybe secure a slightly less miserable life. Comment below, could you stomach playing that game just to survive? Now let's zoom out to the battlefield, because war set the stage for these horrors. When the Mongols rolled into a city, say Bukhara in 1220, they didn't just loot and leave. They had a system, and it was chillingly efficient. Men were often slaughtered or conscripted as human shields for the next siege. Women and children sorted like goods at a market. Artisans got to live, yay, skills. But young women, especially the beautiful or noble, were earmarked for the elite. Persian chronicler Juvayni describes scenes of women dragged from their homes, their veils torn off, their lives upended. Some were married off to Mongol warriors, others sent to harems, and the rest? Well, let's just say the phrase comfort women feels like a grotesque euphemism here. The pain of survival was raw. Imagine watching your family butchered, then being forced to serve the victors. And the irony? The Mongols saw this as mercy. Death was easy. Life as a captive was the gift. Tell me in the comments, what's the most horrifying mercy you've read about in history? But here's where it gets absurdly twisted. The Mongols didn't just take women. They integrated them into the empire's machinery. Captive women weren't just trophies. They were diplomats, spies, even administrators. Take the story of Chabi, wife of Kublai Khan, Genghis's grandson. A Tangut princess, she was likely a captive who rose to become a political powerhouse, advising Kublai in shaping the Yuan dynasty. Or consider Yesui and Yesugen, two sisters from the Tatars, captured and married to Genghis. Yesugen, the younger, suggested bringing her sister into the fold, and Genghis, ever the pragmatist, agreed. These women weren't just bedwarmers. They managed trade routes, brokered alliances, and even influenced military strategy. Survival meant playing the long game, turning captivity into influence. But at what cost? Every decision, every whispered counsel was tainted by the trauma of their origins. Ironic, right? In an empire built on breaking women, some broke the mold, only to reinforce the system that enslaved them. Let's talk about the Yasa, Genghis's legal code, because it's a masterclass in contradictory absurdity. On one hand, it banned kidnapping within the Mongol tribes. Good job, Genghis, cleaning up your own backyard. On the other, it codified the spoils of war, including women. The Yasa ensured order, no random rape in camp because discipline was king. But in conquest, open season. Women from defeated enemies were fair game, their fates decided by rank and whim. A noble woman might become a junior wife, with a yurt and some status. A commoner, likely a concubine or worse, passed around until her usefulness waned. The secret history notes how Genghis distributed women like prizes, ensuring loyalty from his men. One warrior got a beauty from Khwarezm, another a princess from Xixia. It's like a grim lottery, except the prize was a human life. The pain? Unimaginable. Torn from home, family, culture, forced to bear children for your captors. But the irony? This was progressive, for the time, a structured approach to chaos. Drop a comment. What's the most absurd rule you've heard from ancient laws? Now, let's get to the nitty-gritty of the horrifying practices. Systematic sexual violence was a weapon, not a byproduct. When cities like Samarkand fell, survivors describe organized assaults. Women separated, ranked, and assigned. Juvayni writes of maidens lined up like soldiers for inspection, the prettiest sent to the Khan, others to generals or common troops. This wasn't lust run amok, it was policy. Rape as terror broke resistance, ensuring submission. One account from the Jin campaigns claims women were tied to stakes, used to demoralize defenders watching from city walls. Survival meant enduring this, maybe birthing a child who'd grow up Mongol, erasing your past. The absurdity? Mongols saw themselves as civilizers, bringing order to barbarians, yet their methods were barbaric by any measure. And the pain? It's in the silence of the sources. Women's voices rarely recorded, their suffering a footnote to glory. But let's not forget the steppes' own women, because they weren't immune to the madness. Mongol women had rights, divorce, property, even combat roles in a pinch. But war upended that. When tribes clashed pre-unification, women were abducted as readily as cattle. Post 1206, Genghis's laws curbed this internally, but old grudges died hard. Take the story of Jamuka, Genghis's blood brother turned rival. When Jamuka lost, his women were redistributed, a final humiliation. Even Mongol women could fall from grace, their status tied to their men's success. Survival for them meant navigating a patriarchy where power was fleeting, and one bad alliance could land you in the same boat as a captive. Ironic twist, these women, raised to be tough as nails, often outlasted their men, managing camps while husbands raided. Comment, who's the toughest historical woman you admire, and why? As the empire grew, so did the scale of absurdity. Conquests in Persia and Central Asia brought new horrors. Khwarezm's fall in 1221 was a bloodbath, cities leveled, populations enslaved. Women from noble houses were paraded as prizes, their beauty a curse. One tale speaks of a Khwarezmian princess forced to dance naked before Mongol generals, her shame a spectacle. True or not, it captures the vibe. Power was performative and women were props, yet some survived by cunning. A Persian captive, married to a Mongol commander, reportedly saved her city by whispering warnings of rebellion, earning her freedom. Painful survival, but survival nonetheless. The genetic legacy is where it gets mind-boggling. That 0.5% of the world's male population carrying Genghis's Y chromosome? It's not just him, it's his sons, grandsons, and the whole Mongol elite getting in on the act. Concubines bore heirs, spreading the Khan's DNA like a medieval virus. Absurd? Totally. A man who started starving in a tent ended up fathering millions through a system of conquest and coercion. The pain? It's in the descendants who will never know their ancestors' stories, only the shadow of violence that shaped them. Hey viewers, what's the wildest historical fact that stuck with you from this? Drop it in the comments and let's keep this convo galloping. Part 3's coming, and we'll dig into the later empire's excesses and the women who turned survival into strategy. Hey guys, welcome to part 3 of our twisted journey through the Mongol Empire's horrifying sexual practices, where the line between love, war, and sheer insanity blurs into a steppe-sized fever dream. If you thought parts 1 and 2 were a roller coaster of historical horror, brace yourselves. This time, we're diving into the later empire, where the Mongols refined their chaos into a grotesque art form. From the glittering courts of the Yuan dynasty to the blood-soaked sieges of Baghdad, the sexual politics of conquest got bigger, weirder, and somehow even more ironic. Survival wasn't just about dodging arrows, it was about navigating a world where your body could be a bargaining chip or a battlefield. Let's saddle up and charge into the madness. By the 1320s, Genghis Khan's dust has settled. He's dead, felled by fever, or maybe that apocryphal castrating princess, depending on which tale you buy. His empire, though, is a juggernaut, now split among his sons and grandsons, each ruling their own chunk of the world's largest land empire. Agodi's running the show from Karakoram, Kublai's eyeing China, and Hulagu's about to turn the Middle East into a Mongol playground. But with great power comes great debauchery. The sexual practices we're exploring aren't just personal quirks, they're baked into the empire's DNA, a mix of strategy, cruelty, and that absurd Mongol knack for turning human misery into administrative efficiency. The pain of survival is everywhere. Wives, captives, concubines, all caught in a system where intimacy was just another conquest. And the irony? This empire of order thrived on chaos, especially when it came to women's lives. Let's start with the harem system, now a well-oiled machine. Genghis's successors took his trophy wife obsession and turned it into an institution. In Karakoram, Ogode's court was like a medieval Vegas, excess on steroids. Chroniclers like Marco Polo, who, let's be honest, might have spiced things up, describe harems packed with hundreds of women, sourced from every corner of the empire. These weren't just pleasure palaces, they were political tools. A princess from Korea, a noble woman from Persia, a merchant's daughter from Samarkand. Each was a thread in the Mongol web, tying conquered lands to the Khan's bed. The absurdity? These women were often treated better than freeborn Mongol wives, silks, jewels, servants, yet their gilded cages came with a catch: zero freedom. Survival meant playing the part, charming your captor, maybe securing a future for your kids. One wrong move, though, and you're demoted from favored concubine to forgotten footnote. Comment below, what's the most ridiculous power move you've heard of in history? The pain of this setup is gut-wrenching. Imagine being a noble woman from, say, the Song dynasty, plucked from your palace after a siege. Your city's burning, your family's dead or enslaved, and you're marched across continents to serve a warlord who smells of horse sweat and victory. Your job? Bear airs, look pretty, maybe whisper advice if you're lucky. The secret history of the Mongols hints at women like these, integrated into the empire, but never truly free. Some, like Chabi, Kublai's wife, turned captivity into influence, shaping policy and culture. Chabi, a Tangut, was a master at this. She pushed Buddhism, streamlined taxes, and kept Kublai grounded. But for every Chabi, there were dozens of nameless women, their stories lost to the wind. The irony? The Mongols celebrated women's strength. Think Toragin, Ogode's widow, ruling as regent, yet built their empire on breaking women down. Now, let's talk conquest, because the Mongols didn't just stop at Central Asia. By 1258, Hulagu's sacking Baghdad, and the stories get grim. The Abbasid Caliphate, that beacon of Islamic learning, crumbles like a sandcastle. Women, as always, bear the worst. Persian sources like Atta Malik Juvaini describe scenes of horror. Noble women stripped of veils, herded into camps, divided among generals. Some were married on the spot, forced unions to legitimize conquest. Others faced worse, systematic rape as a tool of terror. One account claims Mongol soldiers were given quotas, so many women per man, like rations. The pain? It's in the survivors' silence, their trauma buried under the empire's glory. The absurdity? The Mongols saw this as standard operating procedure, a perk of victory. Meanwhile, Baghdad's libraries burned, but the real loss was human. Drop a comment. What's the most heartbreaking historical loss you've read about? But here's where it gets darkly absurd. The Mongols didn't just destroy, they assimilated. Captive women weren't just trophies, they were engines of empire. Take the Ilkhanate, Hulagu's domain in Persia. Captive women from Georgia, Armenia, even Russia, were trained as scribes, translators, even spies. A Georgian princess might find herself managing trade routes, her beauty a footnote to her utility. Survival meant learning Mongol ways, speaking their tongue, maybe even embracing their gods. Some women thrived. Think of Sorgagtani Beki, Tolui's widow, who played kingmaker for her sons, including Kublai and Hulagu. She refused remarriage, citing loyalty to her kids, and maneuvered like a chess grandmaster. But the cost? Always there, lurking. Every step up was a step on the backs of others, sisters, daughters, rivals, caught in the same trap. Ironic, right? An empire that gave women power also chained them to its whims. Let's zoom in on the Yasa again, because Genghis's laws kept evolving under his heirs. The code was strict. No rape within the Mongol ranks, no stealing wives from allies. But enemies? Fair game. The Yasa formalized the distribution of women, turning chaos into bureaucracy. After a siege, women were sorted, nobles to the elite, commoners to soldiers, the rest to labor or worse. One source mentions beauty contests, post-battle, where women were paraded for selection. It's like a dystopian pageant, except the prize is servitude. The pain of survival is stark. Imagine being judged, your worth reduced to your face or fertility, your future decided by a warrior's glance. The absurdity? This was law and order, Mongol style, structured, deliberate, and utterly dehumanizing. Comment: what's the most bizarre historical law you've come across? Now, let's get to the Yuan dynasty because Kublai Khan takes this to a new level of extravagance. By the 1270s, he's ruling China, and his court in Dadu, modern Beijing, is a spectacle of wealth and weirdness. Marco Polo, ever the wide-eyed tourist, describes Kublai's harem as a revolving door of beauties, with officials scouring the empire for the fairest maidens. These women weren't just for show, they were diplomatic tools sent to marry allies or pacify rebels. A Mongol governor in Tibet might get a song princess to seal a deal. Survival for these women meant navigating a court where jealousy was deadly. Concubines vied for favor, knowing a single misstep could mean exile or worse. The irony? Kublai's China was a cultural hub. Art, science, trade flourished, yet its foundation was human suffering, especially for women. The horror peaks in the margins, with stories too grim for the chronicles. In the Russian campaigns, Mongol raiders reportedly used sexual violence to break resistance. One tale from Novgorod speaks of women tied to carts, assaulted in view of their families, a psychological gut punch to crush morale. True or exaggerated, it fits the pattern. Sex as a weapon, not a whim. The pain? It's generational, carried in the DNA of survivors' descendants. The absurdity? The Mongols, who banned petty theft in their ranks, saw no issue with stealing lives this way. Their logic, victory justifies everything. But let's flip the coin, because survival bred resilience. Women like Toragin, regent after Ogodi's death, ruled with an iron fist, outsmarting rivals to secure her son Guyuk's throne. Or take Organa, a Chagatai princess who governed Central Asia with a blend of charm and ruthlessness. These women turned pain into power, but at a cost. Loyalty to an empire that thrived on subjugation. The irony is thick. The same system that broke women elevated a few, creating a hierarchy where survival meant stepping over others. The genetic shadow looms large, that 16 million descendants figure. It's not just Genghis, it's the entire Mongol elite, from Kublai to Hulagu, spreading their seed through coercion. Concubines bore heirs, their children raised as Mongols, erasing their mothers' pasts. It's a legacy of conquest, written in DNA and despair. Comment: what's the wildest historical legacy you've stumbled across? As we wrap part 3, the absurdity and pain are clear. An empire of progress built on regressive horrors. Stay tuned for part 4, where we'll explore the decline and the women who outlasted it all. Drop a comment with your thoughts. What's the most shocking thing you've learned so far? Word count, over 2,000, and we're still riding hard. See you in the finale. Hey guys, welcome to the grand finale of our harrowing gallop through the Mongol Empire's horrifying sexual practices, where the stakes are higher than a yurt in a sandstorm, and the irony thicker than a bowl of fermented mare's milk. We've trekked from Genghis's brutal beginnings to the gilded excesses of Kublai's Yuan dynasty, and now, as the empire stumbles toward decline in the late 13th and early 14th centuries, we're diving into the twilight of this chaotic, conquest-fueled nightmare. The sexual politics don't fade, they evolve, morphing into a bizarre blend of decadence, desperation, and defiance. Survival here is a high-wire act, with women navigating a crumbling empire where power, pain, and absurdity collide. Let's ride one last time into the steppes' darkest corners. The Mongol Empire, by the late 13th century, is fraying at the edges. Kublai Khan's death in 1294 marks the end of the Golden Age, and his successors in the Yuan dynasty are more bureaucrats than conquerors. The Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Russia, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia are bickering like siblings over the last piece of mutton. But don't let the cracks fool you. This is still a machine of war and desire, with women caught in its gears. The sexual practices we've been unpacking aren't just relics of Genghis's day. They're entrenched, now wrapped in the trappings of settled courts and cosmopolitan cities. The pain of survival is no less raw, the absurdity no less jaw-dropping, and the irony? It's practically a character in this story, smirking at every turn. Picture a world where harems are as much about politics as pleasure, and every captive woman is a potential pawn or player in the empire's endgame. Let's start with the Yuan dynasty, because Kublai's legacy is a masterclass in excess gone stale. His court in Dadu was a melting pot of cultures, Chinese, Persian, Tibetan, even European, thanks to visitors like Marco Polo. The harem system, now a sprawling bureaucracy, is less about conquest and more about prestige. Imperial officials roamed the provinces, tasked with finding strikingly attractive young women to serve in the emperor's private quarters. Marco Polo describes a process so clinical it's chilling. Girls inspected for beauty, health, even sleep habits, because who wants a snoring concubine? The winners? Sent to the Khan's palace, where they competed for favor in a court dripping with silk and intrigue. Survival meant outsmarting rivals, charming a Khan who might be drunk or distracted, and praying your son might one day wear the crown. The pain? It's in the loss of agency, your life, your body, your future, all decided by a warlord's whim. The absurdity? This was sold as an honor, a ticket to luxury, when it was really a velvet-lined prison. Comment below, what's the most ridiculous honor you've heard of in history? But it's not just the elite. The UN's lower ranks, soldiers, governors, merchants, got their share of the spoils. As the empire settled, forced marriages became a tool of governance. A Mongol governor in Yunnan might wed a local chieftain's daughter to secure loyalty, her consent optional. These unions weren't just personal, they were policy, blending bloodlines to stabilize a fractious empire. The secret history of the Mongols, though less chatty about this era, hints at women as diplomatic glue. Think of a Tibetan princess married off to a Mongol prince to keep the Himalayas quiet. Survival for these women meant mastering two worlds, Mongol customs to please their husbands, local traditions to maintain influence. The irony? The empire preached unity, yet these marriages often deepened divides, with resentful locals eyeing their gifted daughters as traitors. Drop a comment. What's the most manipulative marriage you've read about in history? Now, let's swing to the Ilkhanate, where things get grimly creative. By the 1300s, under rulers like Ghazan, the Mongols in Persia are converting to Islam, blending steppe brutality with Middle Eastern flair. The harem system here is less nomadic, more palatial, but no less horrifying. Persian chroniclers like Ibn Battuta describe courts where captive women, Armenian, Georgian, even Byzantine, served as concubines, entertainers, and sometimes spies. One story tells of a Georgian princess forced into the Ilkhan's bed, who smuggled messages to her homeland, risking death for defiance. Survival meant playing a deadly game. Charm the Khan, but don't outshine his wives. Serve the empire, but don't lose your soul. The pain is palpable. Imagine whispering rebellion while draped in silks, your every move watched. The absurdity? The Mongols, now civilized Muslims, still clung to their old habit of treating women as spoils, just with better architecture. Comment. What's the sneakiest act of rebellion you've come across in history? The Golden Horde in Russia adds another layer of horror. Here, the Mongols ruled indirectly, extracting tribute from Slavic princes. Women were part of the deal. Russian noble women sent to Sarai, the Horde's capital, as gifts to keep the peace. One chronicle mentions a Kievan princess married to a Mongol Khan who poisoned her husband in a desperate bid for freedom. True or not, it captures the desperation. Survival meant enduring assault, humiliation, or worse, with rebellion as a last, lethal resort. The pain is in the choice: submit and live, or resist and die. The irony? The Mongols, who prided themselves on loyalty, bred betrayal by treating humans as currency. Tell me in the comments, what's the most shocking historical betrayal you've come across? But let's talk about the women who outlasted the chaos, because the Mongol decline is where resilience shines through the horror. Take Sorkok Tani, not just a survivor but a kingmaker. Widow of Tolui, she raised her sons, Mongke, Kublai, Hulagu, to rule 3 of the empire's 4 Khanats. She navigated court politics like a steppe storm, refusing remarriage to keep her power intact. Or consider Organa, regent of the Chagatai Khanats, who ruled Central Asia with a mix of diplomacy and iron will, outsmarting rivals while raising her grandson to power. These women turned pain into strategy, using the empire's own rules to carve out influence. The absurdity? They thrived in a system built to break them, becoming legends in a world that erased most women's names. The pain? Every victory came at the cost of complicity in the empire's horrors, managing harems, overseeing conquests, perpetuating the cycle. Comment. Who's the most badass historical woman you've learned about, and why? As the empire fractured, the sexual practices didn't vanish, they adapted. In the Yuan, later Khans like Timur faced rebellions, and women became bargaining chips. A rebel leader might be pacified with a Mongol princess, her role less wife than hostage. In the Ilkhanate, conversion to Islam brought new rules. Polygamy stayed, but concubinage got a religious gloss, with captives labeled slaves under Sharia. The Golden Horde leaned on Russian women to cement alliances, their children raised as Mongols to blur cultural lines. The pain of survival persisted. For every woman who rose, countless others languished. Concubines forgotten, slaves discarded, their stories buried. The irony? The Mongols' obsession with blending cultures through blood created a legacy of division, with mixed-race descendants caught between worlds. The genetic footprint is the final, absurd punchline. That's 16 million descendants of Genghis and his kin. It's not just the Khans, it's the entire Mongol elite, their harems churning out heirs across centuries. DNA studies show Y chromosome markers spreading like wildfire, from China to Eastern Europe. But behind every genetic trace is a woman's story. Forced unions, coerced pregnancies, erased identities. The absurdity is staggering. An empire that prided itself on conquest left its mark not in stone, but in flesh, a legacy of trauma masquerading as triumph. Comment: what's the wildest historical legacy you've stumbled across? As the Mongol Empire crumbled, Yuan falling to the Ming by 1368, Ilkhanate collapsing, Golden Horde fading, the women endured. Some, like the Ming's adopted Mongol princesses, transitioned to new courts, their skills honed by years of survival. Others vanished, their names lost to history's churn. The pain of their lives, abduction, assault, assimilation, lingers in the silence of the sources. The irony? The Mongols' progressive empire, with its trade routes and tolerance, was built on a foundation of human suffering, especially women's. So, what's the takeaway from this four-part saga? The Mongol Empire was a paradox, a machine of order and chaos, where women were both pawns and power brokers. Survival meant navigating a world where love was war and sex was strategy. The absurdity lies in the contrast, an empire of unity built on division, of strength built on suffering. The pain? It's in every unnamed woman, every forced bride, every child born of conquest. And yet, the resilience shines through. Women like Chabi, Sorkoktani, Organa, turning horror into history. Hey viewers, what's the most shocking thing you've learned from this series? Drop it in the comments and let's keep the convo alive. Bonus points. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's see how far this step saga has traveled. Hey guys, imagine this. You're bundled in stinking furs, astride a half-frozen horse, the wind slicing through your bones like a vengeful spirit, and your home is a flimsy tent that's one blizzard away from becoming an igloo. That's the absurd, bone-chilling reality of ancient nomads braving winter travel, where survival wasn't a choice, it was a cruel joke played by the gods. Buckle up for a sarcastic stroll through history's frozen hellscape. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. The ancient nomads, those wandering weirdos who looked at settled life with its cozy farms and sturdy walls and said, nah, we'd rather chase our dinner across endless plains and pray the weather doesn't turn us into human popsicles. But winter? Oh, winter was the ultimate prankster, turning their nomadic lifestyle into a survival horror show. We're talking about folks like the Scythians, those tattooed terrors of the Eurasian steppes around 900 BCE to 300 CE, or the Huns who made Attila famous for his bad attitude and worst table manners. These people didn't just endure winter, they traveled through it, hauling families, flocks, and a healthy dose of denial across snow-swept wastelands. The absurdity? In a world where one wrong move meant freezing to death or starving, they kept moving like it was no big deal. The pain? Every step was a gamble with frostbite, famine, and the sheer misery of existing in sub-zero temps. But hey, at least the views were killer, if the cold didn't get you first. Let's start with the basics. Why move in winter at all? You'd think these smart cookies would hunker down, but no. Nomadic life was all about following the grass, literally. In summer, they'd head to lush high pastures where their sheep, goats, and horses could munch like kings. Come winter, those spots turned into frozen tundras, so down they went to lower valleys or sheltered spots where snow was thinner and winds less murderous. It was transhumance, folks, a fancy word for seasonal schlepping. For the Scythians, sprawling across what's now Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and southern Russia, winter meant migrating south or to river valleys where the cold was merely brutal instead of apocalyptic. Imagine packing up your entire life, tents, tools, toddlers, every few weeks, all while blizzards mock your efforts. Absurd? Utterly. One ancient Greek historian, Herodotus, called them the people who live in wagons, but he forgot to mention those wagons probably creaked like arthritic grandparents in the snow. Travel gear was their lifeline, and oh, the irony of it all. Horses were the stars, sturdy steppe ponies that could paw through snow for grass, unlike your pampered thoroughbreds today. But in deep winter drifts, even they struggled, so nomads often led them on foot, breaking paths with sheer willpower and wooden shovels. The pain of survival hits hard here. Frost-nipped fingers fumbling with reins, toes turning black and boots stuffed with hay. Scythian warriors, those bow-slinging badasses, wrapped themselves in layers of felted wool and animal skins. Fox, wolf, whatever didn't bite back too hard. Felt was their secret weapon, compressed sheep wool that trapped heat like a jealous lover. They'd sew it into coats, boots, even hats with ear flaps that make modern beanies look wimpy. But get it wet? Boom, you're a walking ice block. Historical absurdity alert. These folks invented the original parka, yet half the time, they were still shivering because Mother Nature doesn't play fair. And the tents, yurts, or gurs as Mongols later called them. But Scythians had similar kibitkas, circular frames of wood covered in multiple layers of felt. Portable, sure, but setting one up in a howling gale? Picture this. You're knee-deep in snow, poles slipping from numb hands, felt sheets flapping like deranged birds. It took a village, literally families working together while kids huddled under blankets and elders grumbled about back in my day. Inside, a central fire pit smoked up the place, but ventilation holes meant you traded warmth for not suffocating. The pain? Smoke-stung eyes, constant chill seeping through, and the ever-present fear of collapse under snow weight. Yet, these tents were engineering marvels, insulated better than some medieval castles. Ironic, isn't it? Nomads, the ultimate minimalists, outsmarted winter with stuff they sheared from their own sheep, while kings froze in stone halls. Food on the move was another layer of this frozen farce. No supermarkets here. Winter travel meant rationing dried meat, cheese, and mare's milk turned into kumis, that fermented fizz that kept scurvy at bay but probably tasted like regret. Scythians were masters of preservation. They'd slaughter animals in autumn, freeze the meat naturally, and haul it in sleds. Sleds. When snow was deep, they'd ditch wagons for runners made from bent wood or bone, pulled by horses or oxen. Absurd efficiency. Your transport doubles as a freezer. But the pain of starvation loomed. Blizzards could bury grazing spots, leaving herds emaciated and humans desperate. Herodotus whispered tales of nomads eating their horses in dire straits, a heartbreaking betrayal of their loyal companions. Survival meant tough choices. Eat your ride or become wolf bait. Navigation in winter? A sarcastic shout-out to the stars and landmarks, because compasses were centuries away. Scythians followed rivers frozen into icy highways, or trusted shamans who read omens in animal bones. One wrong turn in a whiteout, and poof, lost forever. The absurdity peaks with their warfare. Even in winter, these nomads raided, using snow for cover like ghostly assassins. Imagine charging through drifts, arrows flying, all while your beard freezes solid. Painful heroism or foolish bravado? You decide, but drop a comment. Could you handle leading a winter raid, or would you opt for hibernation? Shifting gears to the Huns, those 4th century CE whirlwinds who terrorized Europe. Attila's crew took winter travel to extreme levels, crossing frozen rivers like the Danube to surprise enemies. The Rhine froze in 406 CE, letting nomadic hordes pour into Roman lands, nature's ironic bridge for invasion. Their ponies, shaggy and tough, plodded through snow, but humans suffered. Frostbite claimed toes, hypothermia lurked. They'd insulate with grease, animal fat smeared on skin, a gross but effective barrier. The pain? Itchy, smelly, and if it cracked, hello frostnip. Absurd survival hack. Boil boots to soften leather for eating if food ran out. Yeah, chew on that. Family dynamics added emotional gut punches. Women, the unsung heroes, managed camps on the move. Birthing babies in tents, nursing through storms, all while herding kids like wayward goats. Children learned young, ride before walk, endure cold like pros. But the loss, infants freezing, elders left behind, it's the raw pain of nomadic life. Ironic twist, this mobility made them unconquerable, yet winter whittled them down. As we wrap part 1, think on this. Ancient nomads turned winter's wrath into a way of life, absurdly adapting where others perished. What's your take? Genius or madness? Comment below with the harshest winter you've survived, and stay tuned for part 2, where we thaw out Arctic nomads' tales. Hey guys, welcome back to our frosty odyssey through the wild, wind-whipped world of ancient nomads traveling in winter, where every step was a middle finger to Mother Nature's iciest tantrums. If you thought part 1 was a deep dive into the absurdity of hauling your life through snowstorms, brace yourselves. Part 2 is about to crank up the chill factor. We're zooming into the nitty-gritty of how nomads like the Xiongnu, Mongols, and Arctic wanderers like the Nomads turned frozen hellscapes into their personal highways. It's a saga of survival so absurd it's almost comical, laced with the pain of frostbitten toes and the irony of thriving in conditions that'd make a polar bear cry. Let's dive back into this historical ice bath. Picture the Eurasian steppes around 200 BCE, where the Xiongnu, those proto-Mongol badasses, are giving the Han Dynasty in China sleepless nights. These nomads didn't just survive winter, they weaponized it, moving herds and camps when settled folks were huddled by fires, praying for spring. Why travel in winter? It's all about strategy and survival. Frozen rivers became roads, snowfields hid tracks from enemies, and grazing spots in lower valleys meant the difference between fat sheep and starvation. The Xiongnu's life was a high-stakes chess game, except the board was a frozen wasteland, and losing meant your kids eating boot leather. Absurd? Totally. Moving your entire clan, yurts, livestock, grumpy elders, through blizzards wasn't just bold, it was borderline unhinged. The pain? Imagine waking up to find your tent half buried, your fingers too numb to tie a knot, and your horse giving you side-eye like, "Really? We're doing this again?" Comment below. What's the coldest you've ever been, and how would you fare in a Xiongnu? Winter? Let's talk tech, nomad style, because their winter travel gear was equal parts genius and lunacy. The Xiongnu relied on horses, those shaggy steppe ponies that could sniff out grass under 3 feet of snow. But winter pushed even these beasts to their limits, so nomads used sleds for heavy loads. Think wooden frames lashed with sinew, gliding over snow like the world's least fun toboggan. They'd pack yurts, food, even kids onto these sleds, pulled by oxen or the sturdiest horses. The absurdity lies in the setup. You're dragging your whole life across a frozen plain, praying the runners don't snap, while the wind howls like it's auditioning for a horror flick. The pain? Frostbite was a constant companion. Lose a finger, keep moving. Chinese chronicles like the Shiji by Sima Qian mention Xiongnu warriors wrapping their hands in wool strips, but when those got wet, good luck. Survival hack, they'd smear horse fat on exposed skin, a stinky shield against the cold. Smell like a barn, live another day. Fair trade, right? Clothing was where nomads flexed their ingenuity, and the irony is delicious. While Han Dynasty nobles shivered in silk robes, Xiongnu riders rocked layered outfits that would shame a modern snowboarder. Felted wool tunics, sheepskin coats, fur-lined boots stuffed with grass for extra warmth. Sound cozy? Not when you're sweating from hauling a yurt, then freezing as the sweat turns to ice. Women were the MVPs here, spinning wool, sewing felt, and crafting mittens so thick they doubled as weapons. But the pain of survival was relentless. Wet boots meant trench foot, exposed faces meant cracked skin, and one bad storm could turn your best coat into a frozen straitjacket. Absurd twist, these outfits were so effective that later Mongols and even Vikings cribbed the style, yet nomads still died in droves when blizzards hit. Drop a comment. What's the most ridiculous thing you've worn to stay warm? Now, let's talk food, because winter travel wasn't just about staying warm. It was about not starving in a world where grocery store meant hope the goats don't die. The Xiongnu were masters of mobile pantries, hauling dried mutton, horse jerky, and hard cheese that could survive a nuclear winter. Kumis, that fermented mare's milk, was their liquid gold, calories, vitamins, and a slight buzz to dull the misery. But when supplies ran low, things got grim. Chinese records hint at nomads boiling hides or even eating fallen comrades in desperate times. The pain of hunger was a constant shadow, especially for kids and elders who couldn't handle the cold as well. The absurdity? They'd sometimes slaughter a horse for food, then use its stomach as a hot water bottle to warm the tent. Resourceful or macabre? You tell me in the comments. Navigation in winter was a nightmare wrapped in a riddle. No GPS, no maps, just a keen eye for frozen rivers and distant mountains. The Xiongnu followed star patterns or used shamans who claimed to read the wind's whispers. Equal parts mysticism and desperation. One wrong turn and a whiteout, and your clan's a goner. The irony? These nomads, who could track a wolf across 100 miles, sometimes lost entire herds to sudden snowdrifts. Survival meant trusting instinct over logic, a gamble that paid off just often enough to keep them moving. And move they did, even raiding in winter. The Han Dynasty feared Xiongnu attacks most when rivers froze, turning barriers into highways. Imagine galloping through snow, bow in hand, knowing one slip means you're a popsicle. Comment, what's the riskiest thing you've done in bad weather? Let's pivot to the Arctic nomads like the Nomads of Siberia, who took winter travel to a whole new level of absurd. These reindeer herders, ancestors of modern groups, migrated across the tundra in the first millennium CE, following herds to winter grazing grounds. Their sleds, pulled by reindeer, were like mobile homes, loaded with furs, food, and portable stoves made from bone and hide. The pain? Temperatures plunging to minus 40 degrees Celsius, where spit freezes mid-air and eyelids stick shut. Their solution? Layered reindeer skin suits, sewn so tight they were practically a second skin. Women and kids rode in sleds under piles of furs, but frostbite still claimed victims. The irony? Reindeer were their lifeline, food, transport, clothing, yet losing even one to a storm could doom a family. Absurd survival hack. They'd huddle with reindeer for warmth, turning their herd into a living radiator. Shelter was a constant battle. The Nomads used chums, tent-like structures similar to yurts but lighter, covered in reindeer hides. Setting one up in a blizzard was a team effort. Men wrestling poles, women stitching hides, kids hauling firewood. Inside, a small fire kept the cold at bay, but smoke choked the air, and leaks were a death sentence. The pain of survival is stark. Imagine your toddler crying from hunger while you're melting snow for water, praying the fire doesn't die. The absurdity? These tents were so portable they could be up in hours, yet one bad storm could bury them, leaving families to dig out or perish. Comment, could you handle setting up camp in a blizzard, or would you tap out? Social bonds were the glue holding this madness together. Nomadic clans traveled in groups, sharing labor and resources. Elders told stories to keep spirits up. Women managed supplies and men scouted paths. But the pain of loss was brutal. Children frozen in their sleep, stragglers taken by wolves. The irony? This communal spirit made them resilient, yet winter's cruelty spared no one. Even shamans, revered for their weather-predicting tricks, couldn't always save the day. One Nenet's tale speaks of a shaman sacrificing a reindeer to appease the spirits, only for a storm to hit harder. Faith versus reality, classic nomadic drama. As we wrap part 2, the absurdity is clear. Nomads turned winter's wrath into a lifestyle, outsmarting ice and snow with grit and ingenuity. The pain? It's in every frozen finger, every empty stomach. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll explore later nomads like the Mongols and their winter war machine. Drop a comment. What's the toughest winter survival story you've heard, and could you hack it? Hey guys, welcome back to our frostbitten saga of ancient nomads conquering winter's wrath, where every journey was a slapstick battle against snow, starvation, and the sheer audacity of refusing to stay put. If parts 1 and 2 chilled you with tales of Scythians and Xiongnu turning blizzards into business as usual, part 3 is about to crank the dial to 11. We're diving into the Mongols, those 13th century world wreckers, and other late nomads like the Sami, who laughed in the face of winter while the rest of us would have cried for a space heater. This is a tale of absurd ingenuity, soul-crushing pain, and irony so sharp it could cut through ice. Let's strap on our frozen boots and charge into the storm. By the 1200s, the Mongols are the rock stars of the nomadic world, under Genghis Khan's baton, turning the Eurasian steppes into their personal playground. Winter wasn't just a season for them, it was a strategic weapon. While empires like the Song or Khwarezm huddled in their cities praying for thaw, the Mongols saw snow as their ally, frozen rivers as highways, snowfields as camouflage for their lightning raids. Why move in winter? Because grazing lands shifted, herds needed new pastures, and enemies were at their weakest, shivering behind walls. The absurdity? These guys planned campaigns when most people couldn't plan to stay alive. Picture Genghis, wrapped in furs, plotting invasions while his breath froze mid-sentence. The pain? Every warrior, every family, every horse faced the risk of becoming a permanent ice sculpture. Comment below. Could you plan a war in a blizzard, or would you rather binge-watch history from your couch? Let's talk Mongol travel tech, because their winter game was next-level ridiculous. Their horses, short, shaggy, and tougher than a bad steak, were bred for this. They could dig through snow for grass, but in deep drifts even they faltered, so Mongols used sleds for heavy gear. These weren't your kids' snow day toys. Think sturdy wooden frames, sometimes reinforced with bone, dragged by yaks or horses. They'd load up dismantled yurts, dried meat, and enough felt to carpet a village. The pain of survival hits hard. Imagine hauling a sled through knee-deep snow. Your fingers so numb they're useless, while the wind screams like it's got a personal vendetta. The absurdity? These sleds doubled as emergency shelters. Flip one over, pile on furs, and you've got a windbreak. Chinese chroniclers, like those in the Guanxi, marvel at Mongol mobility, but they skip the part where half the camp's toes are turning black. Survival hack: smear yak fat on your face to block windburn. Stinky? Sure. Effective? Barely. Drop a comment. What's the grossest thing you've done to stay warm? Clothing was where the Mongols flexed their steppe swagger, and the irony is thicker than their wool. They wore deal robes, long quilted coats of felted wool or sheepskin, cinched with belts to keep out drafts. Underneath, layers of linen, fur, and more fur, because nothing says I'm surviving, like smelling like a wet sheepdog. Boots were felt lined, stuffed with straw, and sometimes coated with grease for waterproofing. Women, the unsung tailors, stitched these masterpieces, often embroidering patterns that screamed, "We're freezing, but make it fashion." The pain? Wet clothes froze solid, chafing skin raw, and frostbite was a daily gamble. The absurdity? These outfits were so good that later empires, like the Ottomans, copied them, yet Mongols still lost limbs to the cold. One chronicle mentions a warrior who rode with frostbitten hands fused to his reins. Dedication or delirium? You tell me in the comments. Food on the move was a grim comedy of scarcity. Mongols carried borts, dried meat ground into a powder so tough it could double as gravel. Mixed with hot water, it became a sad soup that kept you alive but not happy. Kumis, their fermented mare's milk, was a staple, packed in leather bags that froze solid in deep winter. They'd thaw it by a fire, sipping the sour fizz for calories and courage. The pain of hunger was brutal. When game was scarce, they'd bleed their horses, cut a vein, drink a cup, patch it up. Gross, but it saved lives. The absurdity? They'd sometimes stuff horse intestines with snow to make portable water bottles that doubled as food if things got dire. Imagine chugging melted snow from a gut sack while your kids cry for real food. Comment: what's the nastiest meal you've ever eaten to get by? Navigation was a high-stakes guessing game. Mongols used stars, wind patterns, and the lay of the land. Rivers, hills, even distinctive rocks. In whiteouts, they relied on scouts who memorized routes like human GPS. The secret history of the Mongols brags about their pathfinding, but it skips the disasters. Entire clans lost to storms, herds buried in avalanches. The irony? These masters of mobility could be undone by a single misstep in a blizzard. Shamans played a role, reading bones or chanting for clear skies, but when the spirits didn't listen, survival meant blind luck. And yet, they kept moving, even raiding in winter. The 1221 Khwarezm campaign saw Mongols cross frozen deserts, hitting cities when defenses were down. Picture galloping through snow, your bowstring brittle, knowing one fall means your wolf chow. Comment, what's the craziest navigation trick you've heard of? Now let's pivot to the Sami, those Arctic nomads of Scandinavia, who made winter travel look like a lifestyle choice. By the early medieval period, they were herding reindeer across Norway and Sweden's tundra, migrating to coastal lowlands for winter grazing. Their sleds, called polks, were lightweight, reindeer-pulled, and piled with furs, fish, and dried berries. The pain? Temperatures so low your breath crystallized, and frostbite could claim a hand in hours. Their clothing, reindeer skin tunics, boots, and mittens, was sewn with sinew by women who knew a loose stitch meant death. The absurdity? They'd sleep in snow caves if storms hit, carving shelters with knives while reindeer stood guard. Irony alert, the Samis' reindeer were their everything, food, transport, warmth, yet a single lost herd could starve a clan. Survival hack, they'd use reindeer urine to soften frozen leather. Disgusting? Yes. Effective? Kinda. Shelter was a daily grind. The Sami's lavu tents, like mini yurts, were wood and hide cones, portable but a pain to pitch in gales. Inside, a fire of birch or pine fought the cold, but smoke made breathing a gamble. The pain of survival is raw. Imagine huddling with your family, snow creeping through cracks, knowing a dying fire means freezing. The absurdity? These tents were so efficient they're still used today. Yet back then, one collapsed pole could doom a camp. Women and kids bore the brunt, keeping fires lit while men scouted. Comment, could you keep a family warm in a tent at minus 30 degrees Celsius, or would you beg for a hotel? Community was the backbone, but winter tested it. Clans traveled together, sharing meat and stories, but losses were gut-wrenching. Elders too weak to walk, children too small to endure. The irony? This tight-knit life made them unstoppable, yet winter's cruelty didn't care. One Sami legend tells of a woman who saved her clan by luring wolves away with her last reindeer, sacrificing it to save her kids. Heroism or heartbreak? Drop your take in the comments. As we wrap part 3, the Mongol and Sami stories scream resilience, turning winter's horrors into a way of life. The pain? It's in every frozen limb, every lost loved one. The absurdity? They made it work, against all odds. Stay tuned for part 4, where we'll see how nomads faced winter's endgame. Comment, what's the toughest survival tale you've heard, and could you match their grit? Hey guys, welcome to the final frostbitten chapter of our epic trek through the icy madness of ancient nomads traveling in winter, where every move was a defiant middle finger to a season that wanted them dead. If parts 1 through 3 left you shivering with tales of Scythians, Xiongnu, and Mongols outsmarting snowstorms, this finale's diving into the twilight of nomadic winter travel. Think Turkic tribes, late Mongols, and the enduring Inuit, all battling blizzards with absurd ingenuity and soul-crushing grit. The pain of survival is raw, the irony sharper than an icicle, and the absurdity? It's like winter itself wrote the script just to mess with them. Let's bundle up and charge into the frozen endgame. As the Mongol Empire starts cracking in the late 13th century, splintering into khanates like a yurt under too much snow, their nomadic cousins, the Turkic tribes like the Kazakhs and Kyrgyz, keep the winter travel tradition alive. By the 1300s, these groups are roaming Central Asia, herding across steppes where winter's not just cold, it's a personal vendetta. Why keep moving? Same old story, grazing lands shift, herds need food, and staying put means starving or getting raided by someone hungrier. The Mongols' Golden Horde in Russia and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia still pull winter campaigns, using frozen rivers to blitz enemies like medieval ice pirates. The absurdity? These folks turned winter into their wingman, hitting foes when they least expected it, all while risking their own frostbitten necks. The pain? Every journey meant gambling with hypothermia, hunger, and the chance your horse slips and you're both done. Comment below. Could you outsmart a blizzard to pull off a sneak attack, or would you rather hide under a blanket? Let's talk gear, because the Turkic tribes took Mongol tech and dialed up the desperation. Their horses, descendants of those shaggy Mongol ponies, were winter MVPs, pawing through snow for scraps of grass. But when drifts got too deep, sleds took over. Wooden runners lashed with hide, loaded with yurts, kids, and enough dried mutton to choke a wolf. These sleds were survival machines, sometimes rigged with bone runners for extra glide. The pain hits hard. Imagine dragging one through a storm, your hands raw from rope burn, knowing a broken sled means you're sleeping in the snow. The absurdity? They'd use these sleds as windbreaks or even makeshift boats if rivers thawed unexpectedly. Persian chroniclers like Rashid al-Din praise Turkic mobility, but they gloss over the frostbite and exhaustion. Survival hack: rub snow on frozen skin to thaw it slowly. Counterintuitive, painful, and just weird enough to work. Drop a comment. What's the strangest survival trick you've ever tried? Clothing was a masterclass in making do with what you've got, and the irony's thicker than a yak fur coat. Turkic nomads wore layered deals, felted wool robes, often lined with fox or sable for the lucky ones. Boots were stuffed with felt or dried grass, and hats had ear flaps that screamed, "I'm practical, but make it stylish." Women were the wizards here, sewing multi-layered outfits that could withstand minus 30 degrees Celsius winds. But the pain? Wet clothes froze solid, turning you into a walking ice sculpture, and frostbite was a daily dice roll. One Kazakh tale tells of a herder who lost both feet but kept riding, tying himself to his horse. Dedication or insanity? The absurdity? These outfits were so good that settled neighbors copied them, yet nomads still drop like flies in bad winters. Comment: what's the most extreme thing you've worn to beat the cold? Food was a grim game of ration roulette. Turkic tribes leaned on boards, dried, powdered meat that lasted forever but tasted like despair. Kumis, that fermented mare's milk, was their go-to for calories and a slight buzz to forget the misery. In lean times, they'd boil horsehair or chew leather belts. Yes, really. The pain of hunger was brutal. Kids went to bed crying, elders weakened, and entire clans could starve if a herd got trapped in a storm. The absurdity? They'd use animal bladders as portable heaters, filling them with hot stones to warm hands or tents. Imagine cuddling a sheep gut to survive while your stomach growls. One chronicle mentions a Turkic clan eating their dogs to outlast a blizzard. Heartbreaking, but survival trumped sentiment. Comment: what's the worst thing you've eaten to get through a tough day? Navigation in this era was a blend of skill and blind faith. Turkic tribes followed stars, snow patterns, and ancient trails marked by stones or frozen streams. Shamans still played their part, burning herbs to read the weather. But when blizzards hit, it was every clan for itself. The irony? These nomads, who could navigate 1,000 miles blindfolded, could lose everything in a single whiteout. The secret history of the Mongols, while focused on earlier times, hints at later tribes' struggles. Entire families buried in avalanches, scouts frozen mid-trail. Yet they kept moving, even raiding. The Golden Horde's 1242 winter push into Hungary used frozen rivers to bypass defenses, catching knights off guard. Picture charging through snow, your bowstring snapping in the cold, knowing one misstep means your history. Comment: what's the wildest navigation story you've heard? Now let's swing to the Inuit of the Arctic, who redefined winter travel in the first millennium CE and beyond. These nomads, roaming what's now Canada and Greenland, followed caribou and seals across ice fields using sleds pulled by dogs, ancestors of today's huskies. Their Kamutik sleds, made of wood or whalebone, were engineering marvels, gliding over ice with sealskin runners. The pain? Temperatures hitting minus 50 degrees Celsius, where exposed skin froze in minutes, and dog teams could turn on each other if hungry. Their clothing, caribou skin parkas, sealskin boots, and mittens sewn with gut, was so advanced NASA later studied it. Women's Amaudi jackets even had hoods for carrying babies because parenting doesn't pause for polar vortices. The absurdity? They'd build igloos in hours, carving snow blocks with bone knives, creating cozy shelters in a wasteland. Irony alert, the Inuits' dogs were their lifeline, yet a starving team might eat their own harnesses, dooming the journey. Comment, could you build an igloo under pressure, or would you freeze trying? Shelter was a daily dance with death. Inuit igloos were temporary masterpieces, insulated by snow, warmed by blubber lamps, but a bad build meant collapse or suffocation. The pain of survival is stark. Imagine carving ice blocks with numb hands, your kids shivering, knowing a weak lamp flame means freezing. The absurdity? These structures were so efficient they kept families alive at minus 40 degrees Celsius, yet one storm could bury them. Turkic yurts, meanwhile, evolved with heavier felt for winter, but setting them up in gales was a nightmare. Poles snapping, hides tearing. Women bore the brunt, stitching repairs while men scouted. Comment, could you keep a tent standing in a storm, or would you call it quits? Community was the glue, but winter tested it to breaking. Inuit clans shared seal meat and stories, while Turkic tribes pooled resources, trading milk for meat. But the pain of loss was relentless. Elders left behind, kids lost to frost. One Inuit tale speaks of a mother who walked into a storm to save her dogs, knowing they were her family's only hope. The irony? These tight-knit groups survived by unity, yet winter forced brutal choices. Save the weak or save the herd. Shamans and elders tried to guide, but nature didn't care. Comment, what's the toughest sacrifice you've read about in history? As we wrap this 4-part saga, the takeaway is clear. Ancient nomads turned winter's cruelty into a way of life, with absurd hacks and relentless grit. The pain? It's in every frozen limb, every lost life. The irony? Their mobility made them legends, yet winter was their harshest foe. Drop a comment. What's the most insane survival story you've learned from this series, and where are you watching from? Imagine standing on the blood-soaked fields of Gettysburg, the air thick with gunpowder and screams, where brother fought brother in a mad dance of destruction. What if I told you this nightmare started over arguments about cotton, states' rights, and human souls treated like livestock? Buckle up, history buffs and masochists alike. This is the absurd, gut-wrenching saga of the American Civil War, where idealism clashed with idiocy, and survival meant dodging bullets while questioning your sanity. If you're hooked already, smash that like button and comment below. Would you have fought for the Union or the Confederacy, and why? Let's dive into the chaos. The good old days of the mid-19th century, when America was a patchwork quilt of prosperity and prejudice, stitched together with the fragile thread of compromise. Picture this: the United States in the 1850s, a nation on the brink, like a powder keg at a fireworks show run by toddlers. The North, bustling with factories, immigrants pouring in like ants to a picnic, churning out goods faster than you could say industrial revolution. Railroads snaking across the landscape, cities swelling with ambition, and a growing disdain for that peculiar institution down south, slavery. Oh, slavery, that grand old tradition where human beings were bought, sold, and whipped like faulty machinery. The North? They were over it, morally and economically. Factories didn't need chains. They needed wages, albeit pitiful ones. Now, flip the script to the South. Vast plantations sprawling under the sun. Cotton fields white as snow but harvested on the backs of enslaved Africans, whose sweat and blood fueled the world's textile mills. King Cotton ruled supreme, making southern planters richer than Midas. But oh, the irony. They depended on northern banks and European markets to keep the cash flowing. States' rights? Sure, that was the polite term for, we want to keep our human property without federal busybodies telling us otherwise. The pain of it all, families torn apart at auction blocks, whips cracking at dawn, escapes through swamps chased by hounds. Survival for the enslaved meant enduring the unendurable, dreaming of freedom while picking bowls till your fingers bled. Enter the political circus. The Missouri Compromise of 1820, a band-aid on a gaping wound, admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as free, drawing a line at 36 degrees 30 minutes like it could hold back the tide of hatred. Then came the Compromise of 1850, courtesy of Henry Clay, that silver-tongued devil juggling California as free, a tougher fugitive slave law to appease the South, and ending the slave trade, but not slavery, in D.C. Absurd, right? Northerners now had to hunt runaway slaves like it was a civic duty, sparking riots and underground railroads that zigzagged like a drunkard's path to Canada. But wait, there's more absurdity. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, brainchild of Stephen Douglas, that short, ambitious firebrand who thought popular sovereignty, letting territories vote on slavery, would calm things down. Instead, it ignited bleeding Kansas, where pro-slavery Missourians crossed borders to stuff ballot boxes, and abolitionists like John Brown showed up with Bibles and broadswords. Towns burned, neighbors murdered each other over ideology, and the pain? Families fleeing in terror, scalps taken in midnight raids. Survival meant arming your homestead like a fortress, praying the next vote wouldn't end in gunfire. John Brown, oh what a character, a fiery-eyed zealot who believed God commanded him to end slavery with violence. His raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859, a comedy of errors wrapped in tragedy. He seized the federal arsenal, hoping slaves would rise up in a glorious rebellion. Spoiler, they didn't. Captured, tried, and hanged, Brown's last words prophesied the crimes of the nation wouldn't be purged, but with blood. Ironic, isn't it? A failed insurrection that terrified the South into paranoia, accelerating the very war he sought. And the Dred Scott decision of 1857? Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger Taney, in his infinite wisdom, or lack thereof, declared that African Americans had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and Congress couldn't ban slavery in territories. Boom! The Missouri Compromise unconstitutional. Northerners erupted in fury. Southerners cheered like they'd won the lottery. The absurdity, a court ruling that essentially said the Founding Fathers were cool with eternal bondage. Politically, the two-party system fractured like cheap glass. The Whigs collapsed, birthing the Republican Party in 1854, a motley crew of anti-slavery folks from free soilers to know-nothings. Their platform? No extension of slavery, period. Enter Abraham Lincoln, that gangly lawyer from Illinois, with a face like a weathered fence post and a wit sharper than a bayonet. His debates with Douglas in 1858, masterclasses in sarcasm and logic. Lincoln, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Douglas squirmed, defending popular sovereignty while Lincoln poked holes in it like Swiss cheese. The election of 1860, a four-way farce. Lincoln, the Republican rail splitter, Douglas, the Northern Democrat, Breckinridge, the Southern Democrat, and Bell, the Constitutional Union guy, trying to glue it all back together. Lincoln won without a single Southern electoral vote, carrying the North on anti-slavery fervor. The South, they saw it as the apocalypse. Black Republican in the White House, time to bail. Secession started with South Carolina on December the 20th, 1860, like a petulant child storming out of the room. Their declaration? A litany of grievances boiling down to, you won't let us keep our slaves everywhere. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas followed suit by February 1861, forming the Confederate States of America. Jefferson Davis, that stern Mississippian with a resume of military glory and plantation wealth, elected president. Their constitution? Almost a copy of the U.S. one, but with slavery enshrined like Holy Writ. Ironic twist, they banned importing new slaves, protecting their domestic market like tariffs on humans. Lincoln took office March 4th, 1861, amid plots to assassinate him. His inaugural address? A plea for unity, promising not to interfere with slavery where it existed, but firm on the Union being perpetual. Physically speaking, we cannot separate, he said, but oh, the pain ahead proved otherwise. The South ignored him, seizing federal forts and arsenals like kids grabbing candy. Enter Fort Sumter, that brick behemoth in Charleston Harbor, held by Major Robert Anderson and a handful of Union troops. Starving, surrounded, they awaited resupply. Davis, itching to assert sovereignty, ordered General P.G.T. Beauregard to demand surrender. Anderson refused politely. April the 12th, 1861, at 4:30 a.m., Confederate batteries opened fire. 34 hours of bombardment, no deaths from the shelling. Absurdly polite start to a war. But when the fort surrendered, the North erupted. Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion. The Upper South, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, Tennessee, seceded in response, swelling the Confederacy to 11 states. The war's on, folks. Comment below. Do you think secession was justified, or was it just rich planners throwing a tantrum? Let's keep this engaging. Imagine you're there, dodging cannonballs. Mobilization was a mad scramble. The North had advantages, 22 million people to the South's 9 million, including 3.5 million enslaved, industrial might producing guns, ships, rails. The South, fighting defensively on home turf, with skilled officers and a cause they believed righteous, preserving their way of life, aka white supremacy and economic exploitation. First major clash, Bull Run, July 21st, 1861. Union General Irvin McDowell, prodded by "On to Richmond" cries, marched 35,000 Green troops against Beauregard's 20,000. Spectators from Washington picnicked on hillsides expecting a quick show. What they got? Chaos. Troops in mismatched uniforms shot their own side. Thomas Jackson stood like a stone wall, earning his nickname. Confederate reinforcements arrived by rail, first strategic use of trains in war. Union forces routed, fleeing in panic. Wagons overturned, dreams of quick victory shattered. The pain. Over 4,700 casualties, bodies mangled by Minié balls that shattered bones like glass. Survival meant amputations without anesthesia, gangrene claiming limbs, soldiers writhing in agony. Absurd. Congressmen fleeing with the army. Picnic baskets abandoned. Lincoln, that patient giant, replaced McDowell with George McClellan, the young Napoleon, organizer extraordinaire but fighter. Not so much. He drilled the Army of the Potomac into a fine machine, but hesitated like a debutante at a ball. Out west, things heated up. Ulysses S. Grant, a washed-up clerk turned volunteer colonel, captured Forts Henry and Donelson in February 1862, demanding unconditional surrender. His cigar-chomping grit contrasted McClellan's polish. The fall of Donelson opened Tennessee, netting 15,000 prisoners, a Confederate disaster. Shiloh, April 6 to 7, 1862. Grant's army camped near Pittsburgh Landing, surprised by Albert Sidney Johnston's rebels. Day 1, carnage in peach orchards, the hornet's nest buzzing with bullets. Johnston bled out from a leg wound, ironic as surgeons were nearby. Night fell with rain soaking the wounded, their cries piercing the dark. Day 2. Reinforcements turned the tide, but 23,000 casualties, more than all previous American wars combined. The horror, bodies piled like cordwood, rivers running red. Grant's reputation tarnished, but he learned. War was unrelenting. Naval absurdity, the ironclads. March 8th to 9th, 1862, Hampton Roads, Confederate Virginia, ex-Merrimack, rampaged Union wooden ships, then clashed with Union's Monitor, a cheese box on a raft. They dueled to a draw, revolutionizing naval warfare. Wooden fleets obsolete overnight. McClellan's Peninsula Campaign, spring 1862, he shipped 100,000 men to Yorktown, inching toward Richmond like a snail on molasses. 7 days battles, June 25th to July 1st, Robert E. Lee, now Confederate commander after Joe Johnston's wounding, attacked ferociously. Gaines Mill, Malvern Hill, savage fights, Union retreats despite tactical wins. McClellan wired Lincoln, "You have done your best to sacrifice this army." Lincoln's sarcasm in reply? Priceless. The pain of soldier life, marching in wool uniforms under scorching sun, dysentery from bad water, lice infesting everything, survival, foraging for food, writing letters home that might never arrive, enslaved people fleeing to Union lines, forcing policy shifts, emancipation stirrings. Lincoln, pragmatic abolitionist, waited for a victory. Second Bull Run, August 1862. John Pope's Union army crushed by Lee and Jackson's maneuvers. More routes, more dead. Then Antietam, September 17, 1862. Lee's invasion of Maryland, hoping for foreign recognition. McClellan, with Lee's plans in hand, wrapped around cigars, absurd luck, attacked at Sharpsburg. Bloody a single day, 23,000 casualties. Cornfield mowed down like wheat. Bloody lane filled with corpses, Burnside's bridge a slaughter pen. Lee retreated, but McClellan didn't pursue. frustrating caution. Lincoln seized the victory to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves in rebel states come January 1st, 1863. Ironic, didn't free border state slaves, but transformed the war from Union preservation to moral crusade. Europe backed off aiding the South, can't support slavers now. Comment time. If you were Lincoln, would you have fired McClellan sooner? Drop your thoughts below and let's debate this historical headache. Fredericksburg, December 1862. Ambrose Burnside, McClellan's replacement, hurled waves of Union troops against Lee's entrenched heights. Suicide, 12,600 Union dead, wounded to 5,300 Confederate. Mary's Heights a killing field, bodies stacked as ramps. The absurdity, Burnside's glorious mustache couldn't hide his incompetence. Chancellorsville, May 1863, Lee's masterpiece. Outnumbered 2-1 by Joe Hooker, Lee split his army, sending Jackson on a flank march. Jackson crushed Hooker's right, but friendly fire mortally wounded Stonewall at dusk. Let us cross over the river and rest under the shade of the trees. His last words. Lee won, but lost his right arm. Jackson, the West. Grant besieged Vicksburg, Mississippi, key to the Mississippi River. From May 18, 1863, he starved out John Pemberton's 30,000. Civilians ate rats, mules, caves dug for shelter from shells. July 4th, surrender. Ironic Independence Day gift. With Port Hudson falling, the Mississippi was Union, splitting the Confederacy. Gettysburg, July 1st to 3rd, 1863. Lee's second northern invasion, seeking supplies and morale boost. Accidental clash escalated. Day 1, Confederates pushed Union to Cemetery Hill. Day 2, fierce fights at Little Round Top, Chamberlain's bayonet charge, Devil's Den, Wheatfield. Day 3, Pickett's charge, 12,500 rebels across open ground into cannon fire. Half didn't return, 51,000 total casualties. Lee retreated July 4th as Vicksburg fell, double whammy. The pain, amputees screaming under saws, orphans made overnight, farms ruined, survival, scavenging boots from corpses, burying comrades in shallow graves. Draft riots in New York, July 1863. Poor Irish immigrants furious at $300 commutation fee. Rich man's war, poor man's fight. Mobs lynched blacks, burned orphanages. Troops from Gettysburg quelled it, 120 dead. Emancipation Proclamation, effective January 1st, 1863. Black troops enlisted. 54th Massachusetts led assault on Fort Wagner, July 1863. Heroic failure, but proved valor, glory in death. Chickamauga, September 1863. Braxton Bragg's Confederates mauled Rosecrans' Union Army in Georgia woods. 34,000 casualties, Union besieged in Chattanooga. Grant relieved the siege. Then at Missionary Ridge, November 1863. Troops charged without orders, routing Bragg. Grant promoted to command all Union armies, March 1864. Wilderness, May 5th to 7th, 1864. Grant versus Lee in tangled Virginia woods. 29,000 casualties, fires consuming wounded. Grant pressed on. I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer. Spotsylvania, May 8th to 21st. Bloody angle. 20 hours of hand-to-hand. Rain filling trenches with blood. More dead. Cold Harbor, June 3rd. Grant's assault on entrenched rebels. 7,000 fallen in minutes. Regret. That was a mistake. Petersburg siege begins June 1864. Grant dug in, starving Richmond. Out west, Sherman marched from Chattanooga to Atlanta. Kennesaw Mountain, June 27th. Failed assault, but flanked Johnston out. Atlanta fell September 2nd, 1864, boosting Lincoln's re-election against McClellan, who wanted peace. Sherman's marched to the sea, November-December 1864. 60,000 troops cutting a 60-mile swath through Georgia, destroying rails, plantations. War is hell, he said. Enslaved freed themselves, following as bummers foraged. Pain for civilians. Homes torched, livestock taken, but minimal rape, murder, calculated terror. Shenandoah Valley. Phil Sheridan burned farms to deny Lee supplies. A crow would have to carry its own rations. Election 1864. Lincoln won, seeing it as mandate to end slavery. 13th Amendment passed January 1865. Appomattox, April 9, 1865. Lee surrendered to Grant. Generous terms. Officers keep sidearms. Men paroled. Lincoln assassinated April 14th by John Wilkes Booth. Sic semper tyrannis. Ford's Theater. Our American Caesar felled. War's toll. 620,000 dead. Nation scarred. Absurdity. Started over states' rights. Ended slavery. Pain. Generations haunted. That's part 1, folks. The setup and early bloodletting. Comment your favorite absurd moment so far, and stay tuned for part 2. Alright, history fiends, we're back for round 2 of the American Civil War's grim carnival, where ideals, idiocy, and ironclads keep the chaos churning. If you thought part 1 was a wild ride, buckle up, because 1863 to mid-1864 is a masterclass in human stubbornness, survival under fire, and the kind of absurdity that makes you wonder how anyone lived through it. Picture yourself knee-deep in Virginia mud, dodging grape shot while questioning every life choice. Hooked yet? Drop a comment. What's the most insane Civil War decision you've heard so far? Let's dive into the madness. The ascendancy of the northern states in 1863 was like a tightrope walk over a pit of vipers. The Union, fueled by the fresh ink of the Emancipation Proclamation, was doubling down on its moral crusade to end slavery, while the Confederacy clung to its dream of a cotton-fueled aristocracy built on human suffering. Lincoln's proclamation, effective January 1, 1863, didn't just shift the war's purpose, it lit a fuse. Black men, free and formerly enslaved, flocked to Union recruiting stations eager to fight for a freedom most had only dreamed of. The 54th Massachusetts, a black regiment led by white abolitionist Robert Gould Shaw, became the poster child for courage. Their assault on Fort Wagner, July 18, 1863, was a bloodbath. 40% casualties, Shaw dead on the ramparts, but their valor smashed stereotypes. The irony? The Confederacy, fighting for liberty, sneered at black soldiers as subhuman, yet feared their resolve. Survival for these men meant facing not just bullets, but the weight of proving their worth to a skeptical North. Meanwhile, the war's meat grinder kept spinning. Gettysburg, July 1st to 3rd, 1863, was the turning point nobody saw coming. Robert Lee, the gray fox of the Confederacy, gambled on invading Pennsylvania, hoping to sap Northern morale and snag European allies. Day 1, rebels pushed Union troops through town to Cemetery Hill, like herding panicked cattle. Day 2, savage clashes at Little Round Top, where Joshua Chamberlain's 20th Maine held the line with a bayonet charge straight out of a fever dream. Devil's Den, Peach Orchard, Wheatfield, names now etched in blood, fields littered with bodies. Day 3, Pickett's charge, 12,500 Confederates marching a mile across open ground into a storm of Union cannon fire. Half didn't come back. Total toll, 51,000 dead, wounded, missing. Lee slunk back to Virginia on July 4th. Same day, Vicksburg fell to Grant out west. Talk about a cosmic gut punch. The pain was unrelenting. Soldiers waded through mud and gore, their boots rotting off their feet. Field hospitals? Butcher shops with chloroform if you were lucky. Amputated limbs piled like firewood, gangrene claiming what bullets didn't. Civilians weren't spared. Gettysburg farmers found their fields trampled, homes looted, livestock gone. Survival meant scavenging boots from corpses, burying neighbors in haste, and praying the next battle wasn't on your doorstep. Out west, Ulysses S. Grant was strangling Vicksburg, the Mississippi River's last Confederate stronghold. From May 18, 1863, his siege turned the city into a dystopian nightmare. Civilians dug caves to escape shelling, ate rats and mules, their ribs showing through tattered clothes. Surrender came July 4, 1863. Ironic, right? Independence Day, and the Confederacy lost the river that was its lifeline. Port Hudson fell days later, splitting the South like a cracked walnut. Grant's star rose, his cigars burning brighter with every victory. Back east, the Union's own chaos erupted. New York City, July 1863, the draft riots. Poor Irish immigrants, furious at a $300 commutation fee that let rich men dodge conscription, rioted like it was the end times. Mobs lynched black citizens, burned an orphanage, torched buildings. Troops fresh from Gettysburg's carnage had to march in to restore order. 120 dead, countless injured. The absurdity. A war to free people, and Northerners were killing the very folks they claimed to champion. Survival for black New Yorkers meant hiding from neighbors turned executioners. Lincoln, that lanky poet of a president, faced a nation fracturing under his watch. His solution? Words that cut deeper than sabers. November 19, 1863, at Gettysburg's new cemetery, he delivered a 272-word speech that redefined the war. 7 years ago, he began, tying the fight to the Declaration's promise of equality. The irony? He spoke on blood-soaked ground, urging a new birth of freedom, while half the country fought to keep millions in chains. The pain. Families reading casualty lists, dreading names they knew. Survival for Lincoln meant navigating a political minefield, with Copperheads, Northern Peace Democrats, hissing for compromise. The war's machinery didn't pause. Chattanooga, November 1863. The Union's Army of the Cumberland, trapped after Chickamauga's slaughter, 34,000 casualties in Georgia's woods, was starving. Grant arrived, opened supply lines, and at Missionary Ridge, his men charged uphill without orders, routing Braxton Bragg's rebels. The victory cracked open the Deep South, setting the stage for Sherman's rampage. Spring 1864, Grant, now General-in-Chief, took the reins. His plan: grind Lee's Army of Northern Virginia into dust while Sherman gutted the South's heart. The Overland Campaign kicked off in May 1864, a relentless slugfest. The Wilderness, May 5th to 7th, 60,000 Union troops tangled with 40,000 Confederates in a dense, brambly hellscape. Fires sparked by musketry roasted the wounded alive. 2,200 burned or suffocated. Total casualties 29,000. The horror. Men screaming as flames licked their flesh, comrades powerless to save them. Spotsylvania Courthouse, May 8th to 21st. Grant kept pushing, refusing to retreat like his predecessors. The Bloody Angle, May 12th. 20 hours of hand-to-hand carnage, trenches filling with blood and rain, bodies used as sandbags, 18,000 casualties. Grant's telegram to Lincoln: I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer. The pain. Soldiers writing last letters home, knowing they'd likely die before dawn. Survival meant reloading muskets with trembling hands, ignoring the stench of decay. Cold Harbor, June 3rd, 1864. Grant's worst blunder. He sent 50,000 men against Lee's entrenched 30,000. In 20 minutes, 7,000 Union soldiers fell, mowed down like grass. Grant later admitted that was a mistake. Survivors pinned names to their coats, expecting to die. The absurdity, digging trenches under fire, only to charge into worse. Total campaign losses by June: 50,000 Union, 32,000 Confederate. Lee bled, but Grant could replace men the South couldn't. Petersburg, June 1864. Grant pivoted to a siege, choking Richmond's supply hub. Trenches stretched 30 miles, a muddy, lice-infested stalemate. Soldiers lived like rats, dodging snipers, eating hardtack, crawling with weevils. The pain, dysentery killing as many as bullets, men wasting away in filth. Survival? Stealing food from comrades, deserting under moonlight. Out west, William Tecumseh Sherman was carving a path to Atlanta. After Chattanooga, he faced Joseph E. Johnston's wily Confederates. Kennesaw Mountain, June 27th. Sherman's rare frontal assault failed, costing 3,000 men to Johnston's 1,000, but he flanked again, pushing Johnston back. Atlanta's fall, September 2nd, 1864, was a dagger to the Confederacy's morale. Sherman burned warehouses, rails, anything useful. The irony: a city built on slavery's profits torched to save the Union. The war's human cost was obscene. Enslaved people, now flocking to Union lines, faced freedom's uncertainty. Contraband camps sprang up, overcrowded, disease-ridden. Survival meant trading chains for hunger, but hope burned brighter than fear. Black troops like the 54th fought on, their pay lower than white soldiers, $10 versus $13 a month. Absurd, right? Risking death for freedom and still shortchanged. Lincoln's re-election loomed, November 1864. George McClellan, the Union's hesitant ex-general, ran as a Democrat, promising peace with slavery intact. Lincoln, battered but unbowed, saw Atlanta's fall as a sign. His platform: total victory, total emancipation. The 13th Amendment, banning slavery, passed the House January 31st, 1865, but ratification waited. The pain: a president vilified by half his country, sleepless, aging a decade in 4 years. The absurdity of 1863 to 64: leaders on both sides thought they could win quick, yet bled their nations dry. The South's dream of independence faded as Sherman's banners loomed. The North's moral high ground wobbled under riots and greed. Survival was a daily gamble, dodging bullets, starvation, or betrayal. Comment below: if you were a soldier at Spotsylvania, would you have charged the bloody angle or deserted? Let's hear your take, and stay tuned for Part 3's descent into Sherman's inferno. Welcome back to the American Civil War's grim pageant, where the stakes are sky high, the losses are soul-crushing, and the absurdity could make a clown cry. Picture yourself in late 1864, wading through Georgia's red clay, your stomach growling louder than the cannons, while Sherman's army burns everything you ever called home. The Union's closing in, the Confederacy's gasping, and survival's a coin toss between starvation and a stray bullet. Hooked? Comment below. Would you have joined Sherman's march or fought to the bitter end for the South? Let's plunge into the fire and fury of Part 3, late 1864 to early 1865, where the South's dream of independence goes up in flames, literally. September 1864, and William Tecumseh Sherman's got Atlanta in his rear view, a smoldering ruin of twisted rails and shattered dreams. His next move? The March to the Sea, a 285-mile rampage from Atlanta to Savannah, November 15th to December 21st, 1864. 60,000 Union troops, moving like a plague of locusts, cut a 60-mile-wide swath through Georgia's heart. Plantations, barns, cotton gins, poof, gone in plumes of smoke. Sherman's orders: forage liberally, which is polite for looting everything edible. His bummers, those scrappy foragers, stripped farms bare. Chickens, hogs, sweet potatoes vanished faster than a politician's promises. Enslaved people, seeing blue uniforms as salvation, fled to join the march, swelling Sherman's ranks with thousands of contrabands. The irony? The South's peculiar institution crumbled not from moral debates, but from its own people walking away. Survival for these freedmen meant trading chains for chaos, dodging vengeful planners while hoping for a union that might actually keep its promises. The pain was visceral. Georgian civilians, left with nothing but ashes, ate dirt to survive. Literally, some mixed clay with salt. Women hid in cellars, clutching children as bummers kicked down doors. Rape and murder were rare. Sherman's discipline was iron, but the terror was real. Imagine your life's work burning while strangers feast on your last hog. For Confederate soldiers, far from home, letters brought tales of starving families, pushing desertion sky high. The absurdity: Sherman's men destroyed $100 million in property, but left churches standing, as if God was cool with the carnage as long as the steeples stayed upright. Savannah fell December 21st, 1864, without a fight. Confederate General William Hardee skedaddled, knowing he couldn't hold the city. Sherman wired Lincoln, "I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah." Lincoln, probably stroking his beard, must have smirked at the audacity. The Union now had a coastal foothold, and the South's morale was cracking like thin ice. Back in Virginia, the Petersburg siege dragged on, a muddy, miserable stalemate. Since June 1864, Ulysses S. Grant's 100,000-strong Army of the Potomac faced Robert E. Lee's 50,000, entrenched across 30 miles of trenches. Think World War I, but with worse food. Hardtack so wormy it practically crawled away. Snipers picked off anyone dumb enough to peek over the parapets. The Battle of the Crater, July 30th, 1864, was peak absurdity. Union miners, mostly Pennsylvania coal diggers, tunneled under Confederate lines and packed 8,000 pounds of gunpowder. The blast created a 170-foot wide hole, killing 300 rebels instantly. But the Union assault? A disaster. Troops funneled into the crater, trapped like fish in a barrel, slaughtered by recovering Confederates. Total loss: 5,300 Union, 1,000 Confederate. The pain: black troops of the 4th Division, leading the charge, were massacred, some by their own side who feared Southern reprisals. Survival meant crawling through blood-soaked mud, praying for nightfall. Grant kept tightening the noose. He cut railroads, starved Richmond, and stretched Lee's lines thinner than a politician's excuse. Desertions plagued the Confederacy. Soldiers slipped away, hollow-eyed, to save families or themselves. The Union, meanwhile, had manpower to burn. Immigrants, black recruits, and draftees filled the ranks, though morale sagged under the endless grind. Dysentery killed as many as bullets. Hospitals overflowed with men coughing blood or screaming through amputations. The irony: both sides prayed to the same God, yet bodies kept piling up. Out west, the Confederacy's last gasps played out. The Battle of Franklin, November 30th, 1864, was a Confederate suicide mission. John Bell Hood, that reckless Texan with a mangled arm and a chip on his shoulder, hurled 20,000 men at John Schofield's entrenched 20,000 Union troops. The result? A 5-hour slaughter in Tennessee fields. 6 Confederate generals died, including Patrick Cleburne, the Stonewall of the West. Total casualties: 8,000 with 6,000 Confederate, many mowed down in open charges against fortified lines. Nashville, December 15th to 16th, followed, where George Thomas's Union Army obliterated Hood's remnants. 7,000 more casualties, the Army of Tennessee effectively gone. The pain: soldiers freezing in tattered uniforms, barefoot in December, their cause lost but pride unbroken. Survival: desert or die. Politically, Abraham Lincoln's re-election in November 1864 was a gut check for the Union. Running against George McClellan, the former general who'd rather polish his boots than fight, Lincoln leaned on Sherman's Atlanta victory and Grant's relentless pressure. His platform: no compromise, no slavery. Voters chose him 212 electoral votes to McClellan's 21, a mandate to finish the job. The 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, passed the House January 31st, 1865, after arm twisting and maybe some bribes. Classic Lincoln. Ratification loomed, but the South wasn't done fighting for its rights and to own humans. The absurdity: a nation tearing itself apart over whether people could be property, while the world watched, aghast. Sherman didn't stop at Savannah. February 1865, he turned north into the Carolinas, where resistance was fiercer but no match. Columbia, South Carolina, fell February 17th, burned by accident or not. Sherman's men weren't exactly angels. The fire consumed the city where secession began. Poetic? No. Civilians fled, enslaved people joined Sherman's columns, their jubilation tempered by hunger and uncertainty. The pain: families split forever, some freed but homeless, others loyal to masters now penniless. Survival meant scavenging in a wasteland of ash and ruin. In Virginia, Lee's army was starving, down to 35,000 gaunt men by March 1865. Grant's 120,000 kept hammering. The Battle of Fort Stedman, March 25th, was Lee's desperate counterattack, a brief breakthrough crushed by Union reserves. Casualties: 4,000, mostly Confederate. Lee's men ate roots, boiled leather, anything to stave off collapse. The irony: Lee, the South's noble knight, was reduced to commanding a skeleton crew, his genius outmatched by numbers and time. The Shenandoah Valley, once the Confederacy's breadbasket, was a charred husk. Phil Sheridan's 1864 campaign had burned barns, mills, crops, scorched earth to starve Lee. A crow would have to carry its own rations, Sheridan bragged. Civilians, mostly women and children, faced winter with empty pantries, their survival a daily act of defiance against despair. Black soldiers, now 10% of the Union Army, fought with unmatched grit. The 29th USCT at Petersburg's Battle of the Crater faced slaughter, but held firm elsewhere, proving their place. The Confederacy, in a final act of desperation, debated arming slaves in March 1865. The catch? Freedom for fighting. Only a few hundred joined, too late, too absurd. Imagine fighting for a cause that enslaved you, only to be freed into a collapsing nation. The war's human toll was apocalyptic. By early 1865, 620,000 dead, 2% of the population, lay in graves or unmarked fields. Widows and orphans flooded cities, amputees begged on streets. The pain, mothers bearing sons, wives learning of deaths months later, enslaved families reuniting only to find loved ones sold or dead. Survival meant clinging to hope, whether through faith, revenge, or sheer stubbornness. The Confederacy's economy was a farce. Inflation turned Confederate dollars into wallpaper. A barrel of flour cost $1,000 by 1865. Blockade runners dodged Union ships, but supplies trickled. The Union, meanwhile, churned out guns, ships, boots. Industrial might the South couldn't match. The irony, cotton, the South's golden goose, was useless without markets, while Northern factories thrived. Lincoln visited Richmond after it fell, April 3, 1865, walking streets still smoking from Confederate set fires. Freed black citizens mobbed him, calling him Father Abraham. The pain in his eyes, he knew peace wasn't tidy. Reconstruction loomed, a puzzle with no easy pieces. The absurdity, a president hailed as a savior, yet half the nation wanted him dead. Comment below. Would you have followed Sherman's bummers or stayed to rebuild in Savannah's ashes? Drop your thoughts and brace for part 4, the final collapse and a nation's rebirth in blood. Here we are, history gluttons, at the final act of the American Civil War's brutal opera, a crescendo of collapse, redemption, and raw tragedy. Imagine April 1865, the Confederacy's a dying ember, its soldiers starving, its cities smoldering, while the Union's iron fist closes tight. You're there, ragged and weary, wondering if survival means anything when the world's turned to ash. This is it, the endgame, where dreams of rebellion crash, Lincoln's vision triumphs, and a nation stumbles into a fractured future. Hooked? Comment below. Would you have surrendered with Lee or kept fighting like a ghost in the swamps? Let's wade into the wreckage of Part 4, where the Civil War burns out with a bang and a whimper. April 1st, 1865, and the Confederacy's on its last legs, gasping like a fish on a dock. Ulysses S. Grant's 120,000 Union troops have Robert E. Lee's 35,000 pinned at Petersburg, Virginia, in a siege that's more starvation contest than battle. Trenches stretch for miles, a muddy hell of snipers, dysentery, and weevil-ridden hardtack. Lee's men are skeletons in gray, eating roots and shoe leather, their horses too weak to pull cannons. The Battle of Five Forks, April 1st, is the breaking point. Phil Sheridan, that pint-sized Union dynamo, smashes George Pickett's division. Yes, the same Pickett of that doomed charge at Gettysburg. Pickett was off eating shad at a picnic during the fight, because of course he was. The loss, 3,000 Confederates, 830 Union. Petersburg's flank collapses, and Richmond, the Confederate capital, is next. April 2nd, Jefferson Davis and his government flee Richmond like rats from a sinking ship, setting fire to warehouses to deny Grant supplies. The flames spread, torching half the city, ironic, considering the South's obsession with defending their way of life. Union troops march on April 3rd, greeted by cheering black residents, many newly freed. Abraham Lincoln, ever the bold mourner, walks Richmond streets that day, mobbed by grateful freedmen calling him Father Abraham. He sits at Davis's desk, a quiet middle finger to the rebellion. The pain in his eyes, he knows the war's end won't heal the hate. Survival for Richmond's citizens means sifting through ashes, dodging looters, and facing a future where the old rules, slavery, planter power, are gone. Lee's army, now a ragged band of 28,000, limps west, hoping to link with Joseph Johnston's forces in North Carolina. Grant pursues, relentless as death itself. The Battle of Sailor's Creek, April 6, is a slaughter. 8,000 Confederates captured or killed, including 6 generals. Lee watches the rout and mutters, "My God, has the army dissolved?" Spoiler, it's close. His men, starving and barefoot, drop muskets to forage or desert. The pain, Soldiers who fought for years now trudge past their own burned homes, knowing their families starved too. Survival means swallowing pride, maybe surrendering to eat. Appomattox Courthouse, April 9th, 1865. The end. Lee, dapper in his best gray uniform, meets Grant, dusty and mud-splattered, in Wilmer McLean's parlor. McLean, funnily enough, owned a house near Bull Run where the war's first battle raged. Talk about bad real estate luck. Grant offers generous terms. Confederates keep their horses and sidearms. Officers avoid prison. Men get paroles to go home. Lee accepts, his face stone but his heart breaking. The surrender papers are signed and 28,000 rebels stack arms, their cause dead. The irony, the South fought for freedom but lost everything, while the enslaved gained liberty through their defeat. The pain, Lee's men weep as they hand over tattered flags knowing their world's gone forever. But the war's not quite over. Joseph Johnston, commanding the last major Confederate army, holds out in North Carolina. Sherman, fresh from torching the Carolinas, meets him at Bentonville, March 19th to 21st, 1865. It's a bloody brawl, 4,000 casualties, but Johnston can't stop Sherman's 60,000. On April 26, Johnston surrenders near Durham, mimicking Grant's terms. Smaller Confederate forces across the South, Kirby Smith in Texas, Stand Waddy's Cherokee Brigade, fold by June. The last rebel, the CSS Shenandoah, a commerce raider, doesn't strike its flag until November 6, 1865, in Liverpool, England. Absurd, right? Firing on Union ships months after the war is done, like a ghost who doesn't know it's dead. Then the gut punch, April 14th, 1865, Ford's Theater, Washington, D.C. Lincoln, enjoying a rare night out watching Our American Cousin, takes a bullet to the head from John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer and actor with a flair for the dramatic. Sic semper tyrannis, Booth shouts, Virginia's motto, meaning thus always to tyrants. He leaps to the stage, breaks his leg, and limps off to a manhunt that ends with him dead in a burning barn. Lincoln dies the next morning, April 15th at 7:22 a.m. The nation reels. The man who held it together, who turned a war for union into a crusade for freedom, is gone. The pain, crowds sobbing in streets, freedmen mourning their Moses, a country adrift. The irony, Booth thought he'd revive the South's cause, but his act cemented its defeat, making Lincoln a martyr. The war's toll is staggering, 620,000 dead, 2% of the population, equivalent to 6 million today. Another 400,000 maimed, amputees, blind, broken. The South's economy is rubble, $5 billion in property destroyed, cotton fields fallow, railroads twisted, Confederate money's worthless. A loaf of bread costs $100 in useless graybacks. The North, though victorious, isn't unscathed. Widows and orphans clog cities, veterans beg, factories churn but workers strike for scraps. The pain, families reading casualty lists, hoping against hope their son, brother, father isn't listed. Survival for millions means rebuilding from nothing. Freedmen seeking land, soldiers seeking purpose, women seeking new roles in a shattered world. The 13th Amendment, passed January 1865, is ratified December 6, 1865, abolishing slavery forever. 4 million freed, but freedom's no picnic. Reconstruction begins, a messy experiment in justice and vengeance. Freedmen's Bureau, set up in March 1865, tries to help. Schools, land, jobs, but faces Southern sabotage and Northern apathy. Black codes spring up, laws to keep freedmen in their place, forcing them into sharecropping, slavery by another name. The irony, a war to end bondage births a new fight for equality, one that's still raging a century later. The absurdity of it all? The South seceded to preserve a system that enriched a few while enslaving millions, only to lose both the system and the wealth. The North fought for union, then freedom, but stumbled into Reconstruction with no plan, like a dog chasing a car and catching it. Both sides bled for ideals, states' rights, liberty, equality, but ended up with scars and grudges. Survival meant picking up pieces, freedmen building schools, veterans farming ruined land, politicians plotting revenge or reconciliation. The war reshaped America. The federal government's power grew. Conscription, income tax, paper money, all born of necessity. Railroads and telegraphs, wartime tools, now stitch the nation tighter. Women who nursed, spied, and ran farms demand more rights. Black Americans, once property, now vote for a bit and serve in Congress. The pain, a nation united but divided, its heart torn by race, class, and memory. The absurdity, a war that killed 620,000 to decide if humans could be owned, when the answer was obvious to anyone with the conscience. Lincoln's shadow looms largest. His death made him a saint, his words. Gettysburg Address, second inaugural, with malice toward none. A blueprint for healing. Yet his absence left Reconstruction to lesser men, like Andrew Johnson, who'd rather appease the South than uplift the freed. The irony, a war won for freedom, but its fruits delayed by cowardice and compromise. What's left? A nation of ghosts, battlefields like Gettysburg and Antietam, now quiet, but whispering of sacrifice. Cemeteries filled with boys who never grew old. Freedmen's dreams of 40 acres and a mule, mostly unfulfilled. The South's lost cause myth, already brewing, paints Lee as a tragic hero, not a defender of slavery. The North's victory lap fades into greed and corruption of the Gilded Age. Survival for America means facing its sins, slavery, racism, inequality, while pretending it's moved on. That's the Civil War's end, folks. A bloody, absurd, agonizing rebirth. Comment below. If you were at Appomattox, would you have cheered Grant's mercy or demanded harsher terms? Share your take, and let's keep debating this wild, painful history. Have you ever considered just how easy it was to die in the ancient world? No, I mean really considered it. Forget glorious battles or poetic tragedies. We're talking about the sheer, mind-numbing statistical probability of your existence being snuffed out by something as mundane as a splinter. A splinter could get infected, your leg could swell to the size of a prize-winning melon, and then, poof, you're history. Or rather, you're not, because no one would bother to write about the guy who lost a fight with a piece of wood. Now, imagine you're not just some random Thracian farmer. Imagine you're the most powerful man in the known world. You've conquered everything from here to a very confused India. You're worshipped as a living god, and you've personally killed men in single combat. You are, for all intents and purposes, invincible. And then you die. Not from a sword, not from a spear, but from a really, really bad case of indigestion after a dinner party. Welcome to the spectacularly undignified end of Alexander the Great. The most absurd and hotly debated death in all of antiquity. Was it fever? Was it a drunken accident? Or was it the perfect crime? Stick around because this story has more backstabbing than a Senate meeting and more poison than a Borgia family reunion. Before we dive into the banquet that ended it all, let's set the mood. The 4th century BC was not the glorious, marble-white, toga-clad paradise you see in movies. It was, to put it mildly, a cesspit. A grand continent-spanning, festering cesspit. Hygiene was a concept so alien it might as well have been a cryptic prophecy from the oracle at Delphi. People dumped their chamber pots into the street, where the contents would mix with animal dung, rainwater, and the occasional discarded corpse to form a delightful primordial soup that simmered under the Mesopotamian sun. Your water source was likely the same river where a tanner washed his hides and a butcher rinsed out his slaughterhouse. A common medical remedy for a gaping wound was a plaster made of honey and donkey dung. Think about that. You get stabbed, and the physician, a man who probably hasn't washed his hands in a decade, slaps a poultice of sugar and literal crap onto your open wound. It's a miracle anyone lived past the age of 30. In this world, death was a constant, unwelcome roommate. It lurked in every cup of water, every plate of food, every minor cut and scrape. Life was a brutal, painful, and often short affair. And in this environment, poison wasn't just a weapon, it was an art form. It was the great equalizer. Why challenge a 7-foot-tall Gallic chieftain to a duel when you could just slip a little something into his wine and watch him expire while complaining of a tummy ache? Poison was subtle, it was deniable, and it was terrifyingly effective. Arsenic, hemlock, nightshade, aconite. These were the tools of the trade for the ambitious, the vengeful, and the simply pragmatic. A pinch of white powder ground from a common plant could fell a king just as easily as a peasant. There were no toxicology reports, no forensic investigations. If a powerful man suddenly dropped dead after a meal, it was usually attributed to a fever, divine displeasure, or a surfeit of eels. It was the perfect murder weapon for an imperfect world, and nobody, absolutely nobody, had more enemies who might be tempted to use it than Alexander the Great. Let's be honest, by 323 BC, the list of people who wanted Alexander dead was long enough to wrap around the walls of Babylon. He had spent the last decade dragging his army across deserts, over mountains, and through jungles on a conquest spree that made everyone else look like they were playing in a sandbox. He had toppled the mighty Persian Empire, a civilization that had been the world's superpower for centuries. He had declared himself the son of Zeus Ammon, which, you can imagine, didn't sit well with a lot of his fiercely proud Macedonian generals who remembered when he was just Philip's loudmouthed kid. These were the men who had bled for him, who had marched to the edge of the world and back, and their reward was to be told to prostrate themselves before him like he was some kind of Persian god-king. The indignity. Think of the old guard, the grizzled veterans like Antipater, the regent Alexander had left to govern Macedonia. Antipater was old school. He believed in stabbing your enemies in the front, not in all this fancy fusing of cultures nonsense. He and Alexander's mother, the formidable and slightly terrifying Olympias, were locked in a political death match back home. Olympias was a woman who, according to rumor, slept with snakes and was a devotee of mystical, orgiastic cults. She and Antipater hated each other with a passion that could curdle milk. She constantly wrote to Alexander, accusing Antipater of treason, while Antipater sent back reports of her meddling. Alexander was caught in the middle, and he had recently made it clear that he was siding with his mother, and that Antipater's time was up. For a man like Antipater, facing recall, disgrace, and probable execution, what's a little preemptive toxicology? Then you have the Persians. Sure, Alexander had adopted their dress, married a Persian princess, and promoted Persians into his army and administration. But for every Persian noble who was happy with the new management, there were a dozen who remembered the good old days when their king wasn't a drunken Macedonian upstart who had burned their sacred cities. They smiled, they bowed, they offered him wine. But behind the smiles, the resentment simmered. They had centuries of experience in the art of courtly intrigue. A little poison in the right cup was just politics by other means. And let's not forget the Greeks back home. While Alexander was off conquering the world, cities like Athens and Sparta were chafing under Macedonian rule. They dreamed of freedom, of the glory days before Philip and his son had crushed their autonomy. The death of the great conqueror would be the signal for a massive pan-Hellenic revolt. An assassin's vial could be the key to liberating an entire civilization. The motives were everywhere. Alexander wasn't just a king. He was the linchpin holding a massive, unstable, and deeply resentful empire together. Remove the linchpin, and the whole bloody edifice comes crashing down. Our story reaches its climax in Babylon, not the majestic hanging gardens Babylon of legend, but the real Babylon, a sprawling, chaotic, ancient metropolis that was now the capital of Alexander's new world order. Imagine the smell. 1 million people crammed together in the blistering heat, with sanitation that made a Roman latrine look like a surgical suite. The dust, the noise, the sheer oppressive weight of thousands of years of history. This was where Alexander had chosen to rest, to plan his next campaign, the conquest of Arabia. He was restless, bored, and surrounded by sycophants, schemers, and old soldiers who were getting dangerously homesick. The air in Babylon was thick with more than just dust and incense. It was thick with tension, ambition, and plots. It was the perfect stage for a murder. The night in question was a symposium, a Greek-style drinking party. This wasn't just a few friends getting together for a quiet glass of wine. This was a Macedonian drinking party, which meant it was a competitive sport. The goal was to drink everyone else under the table, to prove your manliness by consuming truly heroic quantities of alcohol. Alexander, never one to be outdone in anything, was the reigning champion of competitive alcoholism. On this fateful night, after an already long session of drinking, he was invited to a smaller, more intimate get-together at the home of one of his companions, a man named Medius. Medius was a Thessalian, known for his ability to flatter and for hosting particularly wild parties. It was here, amongst a close circle of friends and hangers-on, that the final act began. The wine flowed freely. They drank from a massive cup, the cup of Heracles, in a series of toasts. The conversation was likely loud, boisterous, and full of the dark humor of soldiers. They were celebrating, but what were they celebrating? The end of a campaign? The start of a new one? Or was there a darker purpose to this gathering? As the night wore on, Alexander took his turn with the great cup. He drained it, as was expected of him, and then something went wrong. According to some accounts, he suddenly cried out, as if struck by a spear. He clutched his abdomen, his face contorting in agony. The invincible conqueror, the son of Zeus, collapsed. Panic erupted. His friends rushed to his side. His bodyguards secured the room. But it was too late. Something terrible had been set in motion. The physicians were summoned. You have to picture these men. They weren't scientists. They were practitioners of a bizarre and horrifying blend of superstition, guesswork, and tradition. Their primary diagnostic tool was the color and taste of the patient's urine. Their treatments involved bleeding, purging, and applying strange poultices. They saw Alexander writhing in pain, burning with a fever that seemed to consume him from the inside out. They probably nodded sagely, muttered something about an imbalance of the humors, and promptly began their well-intentioned but utterly useless ministrations. They would have made him drink foul-tasting concoctions. They would have bled him to the point of weakness, all in an attempt to drive out the illness. But this was no ordinary illness. The pain was too sudden, too severe. This felt different. This felt like poison. For 12 agonizing days, Alexander the Great lay dying. The fever raged, he was racked with chills, and he slipped in and out of consciousness. His body, which had endured countless wounds and hardships, was finally failing him. The palace became a hotbed of rumor and fear. The generals began to circle like vultures sensing a kill. Who would succeed him? He had no clear heir. His wife Roxana was pregnant, but the child was not yet born. His empire, his life's work, stretched from Greece to India, and it was all held together by his force of will alone. Now, that will was fading. Outside, the Macedonian soldiers grew restless. They had heard their king was dead. They stormed the palace, demanding to see him one last time. In a final heroic effort, Alexander had his attendants carry him out so he could silently greet his men. They filed past his bed, weeping, these hardened veterans who had followed him to the end of the earth, now watching their living god waste away. He finally lost the ability to speak. When his generals asked him to whom he bequeathed his empire, he supposedly whispered, "To the strongest." It was a death sentence for his kingdom, an open invitation for decades of war and chaos. And then, on the 11th of June, 323 BC, Alexander the Great, son of Philip, king of Macedon, hegemon of the Corinthian League, pharaoh of Egypt and king of Persia, died. He was 32 years old. The official cause was a fever, but almost immediately the rumors began. The cry of pain after the drink, the swiftness of the decline, the political convenience of it all. It didn't smell like a fever. It smelled like hemlock. It smelled like a conspiracy. Who do you think had the most to gain from his death? Was it the old general Antipater, desperate to save his own skin? Was it his ambitious wife Roxana, securing the throne for her unborn child? Or was it someone else entirely, a shadow in the court who saw their chance and seized it? Let me know your prime suspect in the comments below. The game is afoot, so Alexander the Great, the man who conquered the world, is dead. He's lying on a slab in a sweltering Babylonian palace, and the official story is a fever. A fever. That's the ancient world's equivalent of, he tripped and fell down some stairs, backwards, onto some bullets. It's a convenient catch-all explanation for when you don't know what happened, or more importantly, when you don't want anyone to know. What happened? The most powerful man on earth doesn't just get a fever, not like this. Not with a sudden, agonizing cry of pain after a drink. The whispers started before his body was even cold, and those whispers coalesced around one name, a name spoken with fear and respect back in the heartlands of Macedonia, Antipater. To understand this theory, you need to understand that ancient politics was less like a chess game and more like a sack full of angry, venomous snakes, and Antipater was the oldest, most patient, and most venomous snake in the sack. Let's build our case. Welcome to CSI, Babylon, where the evidence is non-existent, all the witnesses are liars, and the prime suspect is 1,000 miles away. Our chief investigator is a paranoid, vengeful queen with a penchant for snake handling. This is going to be fun. Our suspect is Antipater, the regent of Macedonia. Picture him. He's in his 70s, a grizzled old warhorse from the days of Alexander's father, Philip II. He's tough, he's cunning, and he is profoundly unimpressed with all this son of Zeus business. While Alexander was off chasing glory and trying to get his army to wear Persian trousers, Antipater was back home doing the dirty work, keeping the perpetually rebellious Greeks in line, managing the Macedonian economy, and generally holding the old kingdom together with duct tape and sheer force of will. He was, in every sense, the last of the old guard, and he was in deep, deep trouble. The source of his trouble was, as is so often the case, family, specifically Alexander's mother, Olympias. If Antipater was a cold, calculating viper, Olympias was a raging basilisk. She was a princess from Epirus, a devotee of wild mystery cults, and a woman who possessed a political mind as sharp and as cruel as obsidian. She and Antipater were locked in a vicious, long-distance feud. They hated each other with a pure, primal intensity. She saw him as an obstacle to her power, a commoner who dared to rule in her son's absence. He saw her as an unstable, meddling mystic who would burn the kingdom down for her own ambition. They spent years sending a flood of letters to Alexander in Babylon, each one filled with accusations, warnings, and demands for the other's head. For a long time, Alexander tried to play peacemaker, but recently he had made his choice. He had summoned Antipater to Babylon. Now, a summons from Alexander was not an invitation for a friendly chat and a cup of wine. It was a command, and in this case, it was almost certainly a death sentence. Alexander had just executed his own historian for speaking out of turn, and had a habit of eliminating generals he no longer trusted. Antipater knew that the moment he set foot in Babylon, he would be stripped of his command, publicly humiliated, and quietly disposed of. Olympias had won. Antipater, the man who had served the royal family his entire life, was about to be fed to the wolves. He was an old man, cornered and facing his own destruction. What do cornered animals do? They bite. Antipater had the motive. A motive as old as time itself, survival. But how could a man 1,000 miles away kill the most powerful person in the world? You don't. You send your sons, enter our accomplices. First, Cassander, Antipater's eldest son. If you're looking for personal hatred, look no further. Cassander had recently arrived in Babylon, and he and Alexander did not get along. There's a famous story, possibly propaganda but too good not to tell, where Cassander saw Persian nobles performing proskynesis, the act of prostrating oneself on the ground, before Alexander. Cassander, a proud Macedonian who saw this as a barbaric and degrading custom, burst out laughing. Alexander, enraged at this public display of disrespect, flew into one of his legendary rages. He grabbed Cassander by the hair and repeatedly slammed his head against a wall. Cassander was a powerful nobleman's son, and he had just been brutalized by the king for a smirk. The humiliation would have been absolute. They say that for the rest of his life, Cassander was so terrified of Alexander that he could not walk past a statue of him without shuddering. He feared Alexander, but he also hated him with a burning passion. He was the perfect man to oversee the plot. But you can't kill a king with hatred alone. You need access. You need someone on the inside. You need someone who can get close enough to hand the king a cup of wine without anyone suspecting a thing. You need Alexander's royal cupbearer. You need Antipater's other son, Iollas. This is the linchpin of the whole conspiracy theory. Iollas was the man who poured the drink. He had the ultimate opportunity. Day in and day out, his job was to serve the king. He was a trusted member of the inner circle. No one would have batted an eye as he approached Alexander with a freshly filled cup. The stage is set. We have Antipater, the distant mastermind with the motive of survival. We have Cassander, the furious and humiliated son on the ground in Babylon. And we have Iollas, the inside man, the hand that would deliver the fatal dose. Motive, means, and opportunity? It's a prosecutor's dream. All we need now is the weapon, and what a weapon it was. The story that circulated was that the poison was no ordinary substance. It was water from the river Styx. Yes, that river Styx, the mythological river that formed the boundary to the underworld. The legend said its waters were so deadly, so potently corrosive, that they would dissolve any vessel made of metal, clay, or glass. The only thing that could safely contain it was a container made from the hoof of a mule. The story goes that Antipater, with the help of the great philosopher Aristotle, who, conveniently, was a family friend, procured this mythical water, sealed it in a mule's hoof, and had it sent overland to his sons in Babylon. This is where our historical true crime story veers into the realm of high fantasy. It sounds utterly insane, but think about it from the perspective of a conspirator. If you're going to kill a living god, you can't just use rat poison. The weapon has to be as legendary as the victim. Or perhaps there's a more rational explanation. The region of Arcadia in Greece, where the mythical Styx was said to be, does have a river, now called the Mavroneri, whose waters are known to be fed by springs that leach through toxic rock formations. Modern analysis suggests the water contains a dangerous bacterium called calichiamycin, which is potent enough to cause severe nerve damage and death. Perhaps water from the Styx was simply the ancient name for a very real, very deadly and naturally occurring poison, one that was difficult to trace and whose effects mimicked a sudden, violent illness. The mule's hoof could simply be a fantastical embellishment to a very grim and practical plot. Whatever it was, the plan was simple. Cassander would deliver the poison to Iolaus, and Iolaus, during the party at Medius's house, would mix it into the unwatered wine in the cup of Heracles and serve it to the king. A single toast and the deed would be done. So what happened after Alexander collapsed? Chaos. Absolute and total chaos. The generals, the so-called successors, immediately began to vie for power. The empire was a golden prize, and they were all starving wolves. Perdiccas, the senior commander, tried to hold things together, but it was hopeless. Ptolemy wanted Egypt, Seleucus wanted the East, Antigonus wanted, well, everything. The body of the king became a political bargaining chip. They argued for days over who should get to bury it. An investigation into his death? Please. Nobody had the time or the inclination. The focus was not on the past, but on the future. A future they were about to carve up with swords. A murderer could not have asked for a better smokescreen. Amidst the bedlam of a collapsing empire, the crime of the century went completely uninvestigated. For years the story remained just a rumor. Antipater and Cassander went on to become major players in the wars that followed. Antipater ruled Macedonia until his death from old age. Cassander would eventually seize the throne for himself, executing Alexander's mother Olympias, his wife Roxana, and his young son Alexander IV, effectively wiping out Alexander the Great's entire bloodline. It's a telling detail, isn't it? The man who was so terrified of Alexander spent his life systematically exterminating his family. It's the kind of brutal tidying up a man who harbored a dark secret might engage in. The poisoning accusation was only made public and official years later by none other than Olympias. During her own bloody, short-lived return to power in Macedonia, she held a kangaroo court and posthumously condemned Antipater and Cassander. She had Iolaus's tomb desecrated. She used the story to justify her own reign of terror against their family and supporters. And this is where the theory gets shaky. Was Olympias revealing a truth she had long known? Or was she, a master of propaganda, inventing a plausible story to retroactively justify her own brutal actions? Accusing your dead rival of murdering a beloved hero is a brilliant political move. It makes you look like an avenger, and it makes all of his allies look like co-conspirators. It's the perfect excuse to purge your enemies. The case against Antipater is strong, but it's also built on the testimony of his most dedicated and ruthless enemy. So, what do you believe? Was it a desperate act of self-preservation by a cornered old general? Or was it a masterful lie, a piece of character assassination crafted by a vengeful queen to legitimize her own power grab? Has our CSI Babylon team found its killer? Or have we just been manipulated by ancient propaganda? Let me know in the comments if you think Antipater is guilty as charged, because if he didn't do it, we have to go back to the drawing board, and the other possibilities are even stranger. Alright, so the case against Antipater is locked and loaded. We have motive, means, opportunity, and even a mythical murder weapon delivered in a mule's hoof. It's a fantastic story. It's got family drama, political backstabbing, a dash of the supernatural. It's perfect, almost too perfect. History, you see, is rarely that neat. It's a messy, chaotic, and often deeply unsatisfying business. The Antipater theory relies heavily on the testimony of his mortal enemy, Olympias, a woman who was about as objective as a starving wolf in a sheep pen. So before we convict the old man, let's do our due diligence. Let's open the floor to some other suspects, because in the viper's nest that was Alexander's court, pretty much everyone had a reason to want him dead. Let's start with the person sleeping right next to him. Let's talk about his wife, Roxana. Roxana was a Bactrian princess, a stunning beauty whom Alexander had married in a grand gesture of fusing his Greek and Persian cultures. This wasn't a fairy tale romance, it was a political merger, and Roxana was nobody's fool. She was a woman from a harsh, mountainous land, and she understood power. At the time of Alexander's death, she was pregnant. She was carrying the potential, and at that moment, the only potential heir to the entire empire. This put her in a position of incredible power, but also incredible vulnerability. Think about it. Alexander was young, virile, and had a habit of marrying new women for political reasons. What if he married another princess? What if she gave him a son? What if that son was born first? Or what if Alexander simply decided he preferred a pure-blooded Macedonian heir? Roxana and her unborn child could be cast aside in a heartbeat. Her entire future, and the future of her child, hung by the thinnest of threads. But if Alexander were to die now, everything changes. If he dies while she is the sole pregnant wife, her child becomes the undisputed heir. She, as the queen mother and regent for her infant son, would hold the keys to the kingdom. It's a cold, brutal calculation, but that's how you survived as a royal woman in the ancient world. You didn't have armies or the right to vote. You had your womb, your wits, and a willingness to be utterly ruthless. By eliminating Alexander at that precise moment, Roxana would be cutting off all future rivals to her son's inheritance before they could even be conceived. It's a motive as old as monarchy itself, and who had better access to the king's food and drink than his own wife? She wouldn't have to deliver the poison herself. A loyal servant, a sympathetic eunuch in the kitchens, a little something sprinkled onto a favorite dish before it was served. It was certainly possible. In fact, her actions after his death do her no favors. One of the first things she did was to murder Alexander's other wife, Statera, and her sister. She lured them into a trap and had them killed, eliminating any potential rival claimants to the title of queen. This was not a woman who shied away from getting her hands dirty. Was the murder of her husband her first and most audacious power play? But maybe we're thinking too small. Why pin it on one person when you could pin it on a whole committee? Let's look at the other men in the room that night, the generals, the successors, as history would call them. Men like Ptolemy, Seleucus, Perdiccas, and the host of the party himself, Medius. These were Alexander's companions, his brothers in arms. They had marched with him from Macedonia to India. They had fought, bled, and gotten rich alongside him. And they were, to a man, exhausted. They were tired of the endless campaigning. They were tired of the deserts, the mountains, the strange food, and the constant risk of dying a horrible death thousands of miles from home. They had their fortunes, they had their fame. What they wanted now was to go home, or at the very least to carve out a kingdom for themselves from the vast territories they had conquered and enjoy the spoils. But Alexander had other plans. He was in Babylon, planning his next great adventure, the conquest of the Arabian Peninsula. Another campaign, more marching, more fighting, more chances to die for his glory. For the generals, this must have been a terrifying prospect. They were getting older, their loyalty was wearing thin, and Alexander himself was becoming increasingly erratic and tyrannical. He was demanding they prostrate themselves before him. He was promoting Persians over loyal Macedonians. He was executing old friends on a whim. The man they had followed was changing, becoming more of a despot than a king. What if they decided they'd had enough? What if the symposium at Medius's house wasn't just a party, but a business meeting? A final, bloody board meeting to solve the problem of a CEO who was running the company into the ground. The motive here is simple, brutal, and collective. Greed and exhaustion. Kill the king and the empire is up for grabs. No more marching. No more prostrating. Each of them could become a king in his own right. Ptolemy could take wealthy Egypt. Seleucus could take the vast eastern provinces. The dream of every ambitious soldier could be realized, and the opportunity was perfect. They were all there, in a private party. Medius, the host, could have prepared the poison cup. The blame could be diffused among them all. If everyone is guilty, no one is guilty. It would explain why no real investigation ever took place. They were the ones in charge after his death. Who was going to investigate them? They just quietly swept the whole affair under the Persian rug. blamed it on a fever, and got down to the much more important business of fighting each other for the next 40 years over the bloody scraps of the empire. It wasn't personal, it was just business, the most profitable hostile takeover in history. But what if we're overthinking this entire thing? We've been approaching this like a murder mystery, searching for a culprit with a dagger, or in this case, a vial. But what if there was no murderer? What if the most powerful man in the world was killed by something far more common, far more insidious, and far more terrifying? What if Alexander the Great was simply another victim of the ancient world's spectacular lack of basic sanitation? Let's put aside the conspiracy theories for a moment and consider the most undignified possibility of all. Alexander wasn't murdered, he just got sick. Let's look at the evidence again, but this time through the eyes of a modern doctor, not a panicked Macedonian general. The symptoms described are a high fever, chills, sweating, intense abdominal pain, and a progressive paralysis that eventually rendered him unable to speak. The ancient sources, looking for a dramatic story, latched onto the cry of pain after the drink, insisting it must be poison. But that cry could have been the first sudden cramp of a dozen different diseases. Babylon in June was a sweltering, mosquito-infested swamp. The water was filthy. The food was dubiously prepared. It was a perfect breeding ground for sickness. He could have contracted malaria, which was endemic to the region. The cycles of fever and chills fit perfectly. He could have contracted typhoid fever from contaminated water, which would explain the severe gastrointestinal distress. Some modern scholars have even suggested West Nile virus, another mosquito-borne illness that causes fever and paralysis. Think about his lifestyle. He was a notorious binge drinker, a habit that would have suppressed his immune system and pickled his liver. He was also covered in old war wounds. He had been stabbed, pierced by arrows, and had his lung punctured. Any one of these old injuries could have harbored a low-grade infection that, with his body weakened by exhaustion and alcohol, could have suddenly flared into life-threatening sepsis. The man was a walking collection of pre-existing conditions. His body had been pushed to the absolute limit for over a decade. It's entirely possible that his system just gave out. He was a ticking time bomb of exhaustion, organ damage, and latent disease, and that final epic drinking binge was simply the thing that lit the fuse. Imagine the horror and the irony. The man who navigated the Gedrosian desert, who charged headfirst into enemy armies, who believed himself to be a god, laid low by a microscopic bacterium in a cup of dirty water, or a mosquito bite. It's the ultimate historical punchline, and it gets worse. When he fell ill, his physicians would have descended upon him. Their solution? Bleeding and purging. They would have intentionally weakened him, dehydrated him, all based on a completely nonsensical theory of balancing bodily humors. They were trying to cure him, but with the medical knowledge of the 4th century BC, they might as well have been hitting him with a club. In this scenario, there is no grand conspiracy. There is only the mundane, pathetic, and agonizing reality of life and death before the invention of antibiotics. The truth might be that Alexander the Great's final battle wasn't against a Persian king or a treacherous general, but against a raging case of bacterial dysentery, a fight that he and his useless doctors were destined to lose. So where does that leave us? We have a cabal of suspects, from a vengeful rival to a pragmatic wife to a committee of greedy generals. And we have the prime suspect of history itself, disease and ignorance. The symptoms of poison and the symptoms of diseases like typhoid were, to the ancient mind, virtually indistinguishable. Both caused pain, fever, and a swift decline. In a world riddled with paranoia and ambition, where everyone had a motive, it was simply easier and more politically useful to assume murder. So what do you think is the more compelling story? The grand Shakespearean tragedy of a political assassination, or the bleak absurdist comedy of a demigod being killed by bad plumbing? Tell me in the comments, are you on Team Poison or Team Pathogen? The answer tells us a lot about whether we prefer our history to be a grand opera or a grim cautionary tale. We've been on a wild ride, haven't we? We've sifted through the filth and paranoia of 4th century Babylon. We've put a grizzled old general on trial. We've cross-examined a ruthless queen, and we've questioned a boardroom of greedy executives in sandals. We've weighed the grand conspiracy against the mundane horror of a stomach bug. It seems we have our full lineup of suspects in the murder of Alexander the Great. But history, that cruel and sarcastic old storyteller, has one last horrifying twist for us. A twist that suggests the greatest mystery isn't who killed Alexander, but when he actually died. Because what if, when his generals declared him dead, when they closed his eyes and began fighting over his empire, he was still alive? Let's step out of the ancient world for a moment and into the sterile, well-lit world of modern medicine. In recent years, a new theory has emerged, one that has nothing to do with poison or pathogens, but with neurology. A medical historian, Dr. Catherine Hall, has proposed that Alexander's symptoms, the symmetrical ascending paralysis that left him unable to move, but, according to the accounts, mentally aware until the very end, are a textbook match for a rare autoimmune disorder called Guillain-Barré syndrome. In this condition, the body's immune system mistakenly attacks its own nerves. It often starts with weakness in the limbs and progressively gets worse, leading to total paralysis. Crucially, the victim's mind can remain perfectly lucid and aware, trapped inside a body that will no longer obey. It's the ultimate nightmare, a locked-in syndrome. Now let's replay that final scene with this new information. Alexander isn't dying from a raging fever or a gut-wrenching poison. He's slowly, terrifyingly, becoming a statue made of flesh. He feels his legs go numb, then his arms. He tries to speak, but his throat and tongue no longer respond. His generals gather around his bed, asking him their fateful question, "To whom do you leave your kingdom?" He tries to name an heir, to bring order to the chaos he knows is coming, but all he can manage is a whisper, a flicker of breath that they interpret as "to the strongest." They see his shallow breathing, his lack of movement, his fixed gaze, and they do what any ancient physician would do. They pronounce him dead, and all the while, Alexander is screaming inside his own skull. He's aware. He can hear them begin to argue over his possessions, his titles, his empire. He can feel the attendants begin to wash his body for burial. He is a ghost at his own funeral, the guest of honor at a wake he is powerless to stop. This theory, as horrifying as it is, solves one of the most enduring mysteries surrounding his death. The ancient historian Plutarch tells us that Alexander's body, lying in the oppressive heat of a Babylonian summer, showed no signs of decomposition, no bloat, no smell, nothing. For days it remained as fresh as if he were merely sleeping. To his followers, this was the ultimate proof of his divinity. His flesh was incorruptible, the body of a god. But the Guillain-Barré theory offers a much more chilling explanation. His body wasn't decomposing because he wasn't dead. The paralysis and the shutdown of his systems had lowered his body temperature and his oxygen demand so dramatically that the process of decay was incredibly slow to start. He wasn't a divine corpse. He was a living man with a barely perceptible pulse, slowly suffocating over the course of several days. It's a level of horror that transcends murder. It's the stuff of a Poe story. The conqueror of the world, entombed not in a pyramid, but in his own useless body. The farce only deepens from there. With Alexander finally, actually dead, the question of what to do with the most famous corpse on the planet kicked off a whole new conflict. This wasn't about grief, it was about political capital. Possessing the body of Alexander was like possessing a holy relic of immense power. The man who buried Alexander could claim to be his legitimate successor. The senior general, Perdiccas, wanted to send the body back to the traditional burial ground of Macedonian kings, but Ptolemy, arguably the cleverest of the successors, had other ideas. He had his eyes on Egypt, the oldest and richest prize in the empire. He knew that if he could get Alexander's body to Egypt, it would legitimize his rule there, transforming him from a Macedonian general into a rightful pharaoh. So, in 321 BC, 2 years after Alexander's death, as the magnificent funeral carriage was making its way from Babylon, Ptolemy pulled off the most audacious heist in history. He essentially hijacked the hearse. He intercepted the funeral procession and diverted the body of the world's greatest conqueror to Memphis, Egypt. Perdiccas was, to put it mildly, furious. He launched a full-scale invasion of Egypt to get the body back, an invasion that ended in his own death and failure. Think about that. The first major war among Alexander's successors was a war fought over a corpse. It's a perfect ghoulish summary of the chaos he left behind, and the story of the body just gets weirder. To preserve it for its long journey and subsequent display, Alexander was eventually placed in a golden sarcophagus that was filled to the brim with honey. Yes, honey. It was an ancient embalming technique, but just picture it. Alexander the Great, the scourge of Persia, the son of Zeus, pickled for eternity like a giant piece of baklava. Ptolemy and his descendants built a magnificent tomb for him in their new capital city of Alexandria. For centuries, it was the most famous tourist attraction in the Mediterranean world. Roman emperors like Julius Caesar and Augustus made pilgrimages to see the preserved body of the great man and pay their respects. They say the mad emperor Caligula even stole Alexander's breastplate from the corpse to wear it himself, and then he just vanished. Sometime in late antiquity, amidst the riots and chaos of a declining Roman Empire, the tomb was lost. We don't know how. Maybe it was destroyed. Maybe it was looted and its location forgotten. We simply don't know. The most famous man in history, whose body was fought over, stolen, and worshipped, now lies in an unmarked, unknown grave, somewhere beneath the streets of modern Alexandria. There is no body to exhume, no DNA to test. The ultimate piece of evidence in the world's greatest cold case is gone forever. So where does that leave us? We're left with a collection of stories, a host of suspects, and not a single shred of physical proof. We have Antipater, the cornered old general, a man with every reason to stage a preemptive strike. We have Roxana, the ambitious wife, securing her son's future with a vial of poison. We have the cabal of exhausted generals, voting their homicidal boss off the island. We have the silent, invisible assassins of the ancient world. Malaria, typhoid, a simple, stupid infection. And we have the final, awful possibility of a medical anomaly that left him buried alive by his own friends. The truth is, we will never know for sure. Alexander's death is a historical black hole, a void into which all evidence has vanished, leaving only speculation behind. His death was, in a way, a perfect reflection of his life. It was dramatic, chaotic, and it changed the world forever. His final supposed words, to the strongest, were either a cynical final joke or a terrible prophecy. They unleashed 40 years of savage warfare that tore his empire to pieces. In the end, it doesn't really matter who or what killed Alexander. His time was up. The man who had lived one of the most extraordinary lives in human history was destined to have an equally extraordinary and mysterious death. He didn't die peacefully in his bed. He went out in a storm of pain, confusion, and political intrigue, leaving a legacy of chaos that would shape the next 300 years of history. So now, the final verdict is yours. After walking through the crime scene and interviewing all the suspects, who do you think is responsible for the death of Alexander the Great? Was it Suspect A, Antipater, the mastermind from Macedon? Suspect B, Roxana, the killer queen? Suspect C, the generals, a conspiracy of greed? Or Suspect D, the universe itself, disease, accident, and the sheer brutal reality of the ancient world? Cast your vote in the comments below. Let's see who history's jury convicts in the greatest unsolved murder of all time.